I'll ask if anybody is negative on the minutes of March 12th. Seeing none. All right, that motion is approved with all in favor who can vote. The next budget, why don't we go ahead and take care of Frank in the capital budget since he's on the phone. Everybody should have received a copy.
If someone can't hear me while I'm talking.
Was that Ed?
Ed is on, yeah.
It is.
Oh, welcome, Ed.
Thank you.
Okay, for the 2021 capital outlay, we have a final number of $2,018,119. We were able to meet with all the department heads, the recreation director, the assistant director from the BB library, the police and fire chiefs, the school superintendent, the new facilities director, and the IT director. So we heard from pretty much everybody and got all their feedback. After those meetings, we met with the FinCom subcommittee, Doug, Joanne, and Joe, and got their input. And a week ago today, we came and voted on that final number. If you guys, I can highlight some of the items on the spreadsheet if you guys are all able to see it in front of you. We're carrying over $303,560 of leases from of continued leases. In the fleet section, the big items are for Joe in the DPW. They needed a new plow with a sander, a new dump truck with a plow and a sander, and a new crane to do work around the town. And those were both big dollar items, so we decided to put those on a 5-year lease plan. There's a mobile work trailer in there. I highlighted it because it's an unusual item, but it'll give the guys an opportunity to store equipment from job to job without bringing everything back every night and putting it in the garage. And, keeping it out of the rain. It'll keep it dry. It'll keep it safe. It'll keep them locked up. As usual, every year to year, we've been going with the 3 cruises. The last 3 years, we've done the 3 cruises for the police chief. In the building section, there's significant items. We're putting some money into the conference room upgrade to do some upgrades, and also in the audio video in that room, so that meetings held in that room will be able to be recorded and viewed online eventually. The fire department in Greenwood needs a new boiler. That's an urgent item. The library, the entire first floor needed new carpeting. That's including the 2 rooms as you enter the front door on the right and the left. That's for $60,000. And the library is also getting $10,000 for some exploratory work under the front stairs for some engineering to make sure that they're not going to fail on us anytime soon. There's always been a concern year to year on that item. So if we give a little money each year, Joe's able to do some exploratory work under there. I'm jumping ahead, but we're also giving the library, I believe, $7,000 for some miscellaneous computer hardware, and that's all that's all in the library. Another couple of highlighted items: the Galvin. You'll see faucet replacement, faucet and flushometer replacements for $36,000. We actually gave them, I think, $12,000 or $14,000 last year to fix the ones that were not working anymore. That's a building department. That was a building issue when they built the building. I'll let Joe speak to that if anybody has a question on that. The Dalbear School has a hot water heater. Woodville got a new walk-in refrigerator. The Dalbear needed an air compressor to back up the heating system. And there's the video equipment for the town hall for the first floor, that $31,000 there. The Woodville is getting a playground in the back. Last year we did the Greenwood School. we're hoping that we can replace year to year one playground every year, so that eventually all the schools will have a pretty recent playground. The Woodville one was transferred over from the Franklin School back when the Woodville was built in 2000. And obviously the Greenwood one's getting done this year, and that one was pretty old. That was transferred from different areas of the town. The miscellaneous section, the high school's getting some food warmers. Those food warmers are for food that is actually driven to the other schools, like the Walton, or schools that don't have a kitchen, that don't have the ability to cook, so they're able to keep the food warm until they bring it over to them. There's some software, attendance software for the schools, and the fire department and alarm are getting new portable radios for the department for everybody. I believe that's 75 radios. I had it written down somewhere, but that gives them all new radios. There's, if I remember correctly, they use 16 are always on. So yeah, 4 times 16, maybe it was more in the 60s that they have about 65 radios. Finally, the IT section there, the schools, the wireless access points. The schools are going to replace all the wireless access points in the high school. That's something that needs to be done. I mean, if you had to put a time frame on it, at least every 5 years, if not sooner. And that's obviously something that can be discussed to go in a different budget. But for now, it's a hardware issue. It's new, so it's capital. We felt it was capital. In the sewer division, they have 112,000. Oh, I'm sorry. So the total of the regular capital is $2,018,119. My spreadsheet has a different total. I don't know if that total adds up on yours. Oh no, $2,018,119. It adds up. The sewer division total. You got a new utility truck and a new high velocity pump for their truck. The high velocity pump is what the sewer lines, when they get plugged up, they're able to camera and sewer and
He's getting quiet. Move it toward your mic.
Okay.
And just spending the $30,000 eliminates the need for them to buy a new truck. They're basically replacing the guts of that truck, and the value of the truck is in the camera and the flush, in the high velocity flush. And then water division, $82,500, and that is everything. Any questions that I can answer? If Joe, if you want to talk about the faucets at the Galvin as to why they have to, this will replace all the faucets at the Galvin with new ones with last year's money and this year's money.
Yeah, basically the problem was when they these faucets and everything were quote unquote energy type efficient. We were able to get more points for that as a result of it when we built the Galvin. However, from the very beginning, these are brand new, and essentially they never really worked very well from the beginning. There was also some water pressure issues that were identified, so the replacements were necessary.
Any other specific questions?
I'm looking for raised hands and I'm not seeing any. Oh, Dennis. Dennis has a question. Dennis, go ahead.
Joe, I remember those water faucets coming up when the school was first built, and they had to put in reduced pressure backflows. I know to the gym areas where the faucets were. This is system-wide now. Are we still having fluctuations with the water pressure?
No, from my understanding, that issue has been resolved.
Okay.
Anybody else with questions? Okay, Dennis, you can put your hand down if you're done. Very good.
Good job.
Yeah, this is Jim Sullivan. I got one question.
Go ahead, Jim.
Was there any significant item that didn't make the list this year?
There were, the school asked for two boilers, for two air compressors. I guess two of the schools, they were failed, and they couldn't give us a significant repair report that they both definitely did not work. So we decided to give them one and go for next week. Joe talked to his buildings manager to make sure that they both weren't technically all down, so that we wouldn't leave them high and dry. I think another item would be the fire alarm department asked for some funds to upgrade the alarm system because it was getting pretty old. But from everything we could tell by asking the questions, it didn't seem to be a life and death urgent matter, and they've been running on the same system for a long time, but it's still working. They're still making it work. So this year we decided to go with the radios, the portable radios for them for $124,000, and we tabled till next year for those items. I believe it was about $75,000. And that I think those are the only two big items, Jim, that probably we put a lot of thought into.
All right, thanks. I'm good, Dan. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.
Doug Butler has his hand up.
Well, there you go. I think this is not a question. I think probably if you're not talking, you should probably put yourself on mute because we're getting a lot of echoey-ness going on. And I don't know if it's the fact that it's dual phones or whatnot, but if you're not on mute and you're not talking, on mute. I'll follow my own advice.
Still there, Frank?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay. I think Dawn has a question if you can't see it, Dan.
Yes. So the cemetery, the Creation Garden Phase 2, the $100,000, is that half of Phase 2, or is that the remainder of the total amount?
I believe that's the remainder of the total amount just to get it done.
Okay, thank you.
Joe Conway can obviously speak more to that. And if I remember correctly, he wanted just to get it done because then there was an issue with the building. But I'm sorry, I should know the answer on that.
Okay.
Hey, this is Stephen Chase. I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Do we have a comparison to FY20?
Well, last year's budget number was $2,140,048. So it was lower. It is lower than last year's.
Do we happen to have a projection for future years as well?
The way there is a report, and Joe Conway has projections, but year to year there's things that always come up new, so it's hard. Joe's actually doing a great job of looking out into the future on items like the trucks and maybe boilers and items in the buildings that'll need to be on the plan eventually. But no, we usually start the year with what Joe puts together for that current year with everyone's requests, which could be anywhere from $5 to $10 million, and then get it down to a reasonable number that like around $2 million. The last couple of years we've been very lucky to be around $2 million. But to answer that question, there is a projection report, but the accuracy of it is questionable. I have, I think the last one I have is from 2 years ago. But again, it's not like you could look and say, all right, in 2 years this is going to be coming up, because something more important could come up and replace that. So it's hard to do that. But Joe, if anyone's going to be on top of that, something like that, it's definitely Joe Conway.
Dennis Hogan.
Go ahead, Dennis.
On the fire alarm, I believe the fire chief wanted that for the new change to go to the central command station, saying that equipment wasn't compatible to it. So if we're not doing the central command station, we don't need it this year anyway.
We did bring that up in the meeting too, that it could be part of the building upgrade, but I didn't know if someone had said that it might have been too late now because the projected cost might have already been put in there. I'm not sure, but that was part of our thinking as well.
Dan, did we lose you?
And I'm still here.
Oh, Dan.
Yep.
I
He's been awfully quiet.
I know. I'm saying he's showing up as here, but he's not there. Okay. Maybe something happened up there.
I'm seeing Dan pretty clear, Steve.
I'm not
Me
hearing
too.
him. Huh.
He doesn't appear to be talking. Oh, he's talking now.
Okay.
No. Frank, I have a quick question for you, sir. What was the grand total again for the ask for this year?
$2,018,119, and plus the water and then plus the sewer.
Got it. Thank you.
So Dan is screen sharing. Anyway.
Dan, are you still there?
I think
Maybe he muted his microphone.
No, it's not muted. It's not showing as muted.
Okay.
On my sheet anyway.
But he might mute it otherwise. Like I can mute my phone.
Right.
And it doesn't show up.
Right. Okay.
Great.
All right.
Let's see if I can fix that.
All right, you're here, Dan. We can hear and see you now.
Wow. It must be this DSL in northern Maine.
All right.
All right. I think that's it for capital. Anything
Yes,
else?
that's all.
All right. Thank you very much, John. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Frank.
Yeah.
Thanks, Frank.
Frank did a great job, and I think that Joe Bertrand spoke at the town council meeting, and he seemed to be very pleased too. Maybe he wants to chime in overall on that.
I have a very good friend who's John Leone, so I kind of slipped up there. All right. I believe that's it for capital.
Thank you, Frank.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
So why don't we jump over to WCAT and the cable TV? And I believe Ryan is going to start.
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to. Hi, everybody. I'll introduce myself just real quickly for you. My name is Ryan Boyd. I took over as the executive director of WCAT in December. And since that time, I've been working really hard to ensure that WCAT continues to be an important community asset to the town. We're actively working to adjust ourselves during this kind of crazy time to further increase our role and what we're doing within the community. And we're here tonight to help present the proposed enterprise fund budget for WCAT for your review and to address any questions that you might have. Paul Norman, our treasurer on our board of directors, is also with me, and I think he's going to help address questions as well, and he has a few words he would like to say as well.
Thank you, Ryan. Good evening, everyone. Happy to be participating in tonight's meeting to help everyone understand some of what's happening with the new enterprise fund requirement that's now been established for the town of Wakefield, and why this issue is even being presented to town meeting for approval. But first I'll say, as a way of introduction, I'm a relatively new Wakefield resident, moved in September of 18. I'm a CPA and an MBA. I provide consulting services for high-tech and life sciences companies. And I really have a shared interest with all of you in trying to make sure that the resources that we collectively have are used to their best ability. So with that, I'd like to say that I'm happy to help in this way for WCAT. And in the future, to the extent that anyone on the committee, or if you need help on the committee, I'd be happy to be considered for that kind of a role. With that said, I'm happy to join you from outside the Encore. It's not a bad place to be. It's not very crowded. The odds are in my favor. No, actually, this is my introduction to WCAT was by putting together a show called Visual Radio. And coincidentally, we were the only local access cable company in the area, including Boston, that was invited to the media open house. So we did an hour welcome to the Encore show. It's on WCAT, and the commercial has now ended. Just to recap, has everyone seen a copy of the selected pages of the most recent audit report that I believe was distributed by Chairman Sherman?
Yeah, everybody has it. I think we've got the documents. So maybe what we could do now is have Kevin go through the budget. Kevin, you still there?
I'm still here. So tonight for cable public access, we have both a budget and an article. They basically coincide that we have an article at town meeting. We need to accept Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53, F.5, to set up an enterprise fund for cable TV public access funds. This is a requirement, like I said, from the Mass Department of Revenue. The Mass Department of Revenues, they want all communities to start handling these cable funds the same way. The funds for this budget, they come in from our cable providers, which are Verizon, Comcast, and RCN, per an agreement with the town. And this is to provide public, educational, and governmental cable access. The budget is based on both current and prior year revenue estimates, and is apportioned for the town's agreements with these providers. The personal services line item for fiscal 21 is $163,420. This is used for the salaries at Wakefield Public Schools at the high school for 2 teachers in the media department. Under contractual services, the amount for fiscal 21 is $388,700. This is used for a payment to WCAT, which is a 503C that was set up to provide PEG cable access to the town. The capital amount of $25,000, that's split 1/3 to the school department and 2/3 to WCAT. That split is based on the number of channels. There's a governmental and a public access channel that WCAT handles, and the educational channel that the school department handles. The total budget request for fiscal 21, $577,120. with that, if there are questions. I worked very closely with both Ryan, Paul Norman, and Christine at the school department on this budget, and everyone is comfortable with these numbers.
I'm looking for raised hands. I'm not seeing any yet. Oh, Doug Butler. Go ahead, Doug.
A quick question. I think the financials that you sent over, Dan, were like very partial. They were like 4 pages. They didn't give us much detail in terms of breakdown of the WCAT finances. I just wasn't sure if we should see those or if we shouldn't. And I'm not sure if that's a question for you, Dan, or for WCAT.
We were the ones that provided the financial statements, so I'll be happy to answer that question. We pride ourselves on fiscal transparency. We selected 4 pages, the opinion page, the fund statement, and a detail of expenses to try to get to the heart of what you folks may be most interested in. You know, our corporate, we're a 501c3, as Kevin said, and therefore on the IRS site, our Form 990 is visible to anyone who has a computer. So, if you would like to talk about the audit of WCAT, you know, we could certainly consider that, but quite honestly, we're a corporation. We're not a department of the town. So, but again, if you would like a copy of the full audit report or anyone else on the committee, just please email Ryan. Ryan, is it Arboyd at WCAT?
Yeah, we can get it. It's just it was just a question. I wasn't sure like why.
That was the reason.
Again, given our group, we're generally able to handle financials reasonably well. So just that was my only question. Iced coffee?
Yeah, iced coffee. I've been drinking it all night, all day. Everything runs together. So you've got a big glass yourself.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions? I'm not seeing any more hands raised.
I see
Doug?
Stefan's hand is actually raised physically.
Oh, physically? I don't see that.
Well, it was.
Oh, it's down now. Yes, now it's up.
Well, Stefan, do you have a question?
You're muted.
Should I virtually raise my hand next time?
There you go.
Or physically raise it?
Virtually. There's a virtual option.
Gotcha. Okay. No, I just had out of curiosity, I was just actually curious if WCAT has any possibility of generating revenue from the videos that it produces.
That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. One of the things that is unique about WCAT is, with respect to the other stations in our North Shore community, is that we do generate about $15,000 to $20,000 of sponsorship and other income that is based upon really what we do for the community. Movies on the Lake is our big fundraiser, and obviously we're challenged right now on how are we going to replicate that. So it's been Ryan and his team in the past who have been successful in looking to try to generate income from other sources, which coincidentally will be incredibly important in the years ahead because the FCC has just changed the rulings on the requirement that 5% of every dollar the cable company receives goes to the local access TV. And the ruling has changed, and those funds will be decreased in the not too distant future. So other funding sources is a top priority for us.
And I guess a follow-up question to that, though, should the revenue figures be included in this budget?
They are. The top line that Kevin is recommending that we agree with is the projected cable receipts that the town of Wakefield will receive from the contracts that are in place with the 3 cable providers.
Anybody else with questions? Go ahead, Doug.
Oh, just another question then. In terms of the discussions with the 3 cable companies, have they notified you in terms of whether rates are, what they plan to do in terms of cutting funding?
Well, what's actually happened, Ryan, if you have anything to add, please do.
Yeah.
The federal rules have changed that allow each cable company to approach each municipality and change the percentage in the contract to reduce it. That is now been passed, and therefore we're waiting for the cable companies to knock on our door and say, we would like to renegotiate. Now, obviously, they're going to go for Boston and Cambridge and renegotiate those first before they come out here to Wakefield and Stoneham, but it's happening.
So just to echo what Paul's saying, yeah, we have to be ready for it. And as a town, I don't think they're going to contact us directly. They'll probably go, honestly, to Steve or Tom Mullen and start talking to them about it first. But we have to be ready to kind of figure out as a town what sort of things we're going to fight for and fight with.
Okay, thank you.
Can we kick out the first one who comes?
Right.
Can we kick out the first cable company that approaches us to cut the rates? Can we kick them out of the town?
That is not a question for me, unfortunately.
I think that's a question for Tom Mullen. We have contracts with all 3 cable companies. The last 2, we just negotiated a couple recently. I think another one is up in a couple of years. So
yeah, Verizon's up next.
Verizon's up next. The others are out 10 years from now or 8 years from now. So
I would hope Tom put in there if they cut their rates, then we certainly can come back to them.
well, we agreed to a rate, right? We agreed to a rate, so they can't certainly change the rate.
Well, the issue.
Let me expand on that for a
government
minute.
giving them this issue.
Let me expand on that for a moment. Steve is absolutely right that we have these contracts in place between the cable companies and the town of Wakefield. The issue is the FCC has ruled that those contracts can be changed, and whether or not they have expired or not. So the remaining portion of the contract will be changed effective when it's renegotiated. So we do not have the leverage to say, because you're following a new FCC regulation, you're in breach of contract, so we're kicking you out. We do not have that right, in my opinion.
I don't know.
Okay, well, fortunately, we don't have to deal with that
That's
issue
fine.
in the next year's budget.
That's next week's problem, Doug.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. Jim Sullivan's got his hand up. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious on the revenue in, was that the contractual services? It was mentioned earlier about the revenue coming in. Is that in the budget or not, right? The spreadsheet.
Are you referring to the sponsorship income that WCAT is able to generate through its efforts in the community?
No, I'm referring to the contracts, the payment to WCAT from the providers.
The revenue line in the proposed budget that we were seeing the screen shared before, perhaps we can look at that again. The revenue line is Kevin's estimate of what we will be receiving from the contractual agreements that are in place today. The nice thing about Kevin's schedule is it shows the historical perspective of how much the town has received for the prior 3 periods. So you can all see that number is decreasing as cable subscribers leave and go to internet streaming. So that's the other factor that we all have to be cognizant of. Is it possible to share the screen? I'm not sure who is controlling that.
We're seeing you, Ann.
Okay, well, so we can't see the shared screen right now, but the number, Kevin, do you have it on your computer that you can speak to the numbers?
Are you talking about the, Paul, are you talking about the budget numbers?
The budget worksheet.
I believe that's what Mr. Sullivan was asking about.
Okay, let me bring that up.
Right, so is the line item, it says contractual services for WCAT, then in personal services, and then capital. There's like 3 line items.
Yes, Dan, could you please scroll this up so we can see the tops? Those are the expenses. We'd like to see the revenue, please.
I think these are the 3.
Keep going, please. I think it'll just be helpful if we start at the beginning of the page.
That's the beginning.
Thank you. So the first line is the expenditures. I'm sorry, and this is really the version that we looked at town council. This is the revenue expectation, starting with the actual for 2018. The 3 cable companies paid $620,000, down to $593 the next year. You can see the downward trend, and Kevin's projection, which we agree with, is $577,120. That's what we will get based upon the existing 5% approximately of every dollar from Wakefield subscribers coming to the town. Out of that 577, if you scroll the screen up a little bit to the next section, please, or down, I'm sorry. Thank you. Those funds have been dispersed for 2 purposes: personnel services, Wakefield Public Schools, approximately 180 down to 163, and then contractual services. It's the contract that WCAT has with the town of Wakefield to provide cable services. So we are expecting $388,700 in fiscal 21 based on Kevin's estimates, which, as I said, as we agree with. So hopefully that helps you understand how the budget is put together, but I think more importantly, how the cash coming into Wakefield is spent on these services.
Are you all set, Jim?
Yep, I got it now. That makes a little more sense. Thank you.
All right. Dennis has a question. Go ahead, Dennis.
I don't see where that 24,000 of income from sales is listed as an offset to this budget.
You're exactly right. So let me explain that. What you're looking at is that the town of Wakefield has contracted with WCAT to provide cable services at the rate of $388,000. We, as a separate legal entity, take that contractual fee and provide you with the services. Separate as a corporation, separate from the town of Wakefield, we try to generate income on our own through other means. That's income that's included in the IRS 990 statement. It's about $24,000 a year. Our expenses are, 18 to 20. We don't make a ton on it, but that information is available. But that's really you viewing a corporation's financial reports. What you're looking at here, sir, is the amount that's the contractual obligation between WCAT and Wakefield, and this new enterprise budget structure that we have to have in place due to mass law. Does that help?
It helps. It just makes us reconsider as to what contractually we should be entertaining next time. That's all. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Amy has a question. Her hand's up. Amy, go ahead.
Sure. So the contractual services, on here is almost treated like a wash. So it's money that comes into WCAT for contractual services, and then 100% of it is paid back out.
That's a very good question. Go ahead, Ryan.
I was just going to say it's essentially a pass through from the cable companies, goes through the town, comes to us, and then a third of it to the high school. So it's essentially just a pass through sort of situation.
Okay.
So what that really means from an operations point of view is Kevin receives a check every quarter. He puts it in the bank account. He writes a check to us every quarter. We put it in the bank account. The Wakefield bank account is zero. We now just have to run it through this fund mechanism, but nothing's going to change. He'll receive 3 checks a quarter. He'll send us 3 checks a quarter. The fund balance will be zero.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? I don't see any other hands are up. So with that, thank you very much, Paul, Ryan, appreciate it. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Next up, I believe, are the schools. Doug, you there?
We are.
Very good. Your room looks awful Spartan.
No, it is a little bit, I guess. It's the kitchen. I can do this a couple of different ways, Dan. Would you like me to go through the slides or address your questions first?
The slide, please.
So these slides we shared with town council on Monday. And so just to start off, the objectives in our FY21 budget, or the objectives of these slides, is to kind of just communicate our timeline, communicate our instructional strategy, and the data that we collect, to talk about budget priorities and the positions that we are proposing that we add this year, and to present a summary of our 3 cost areas and what the total budget proposed is for FY21. And there'll be time for any questions that anyone has at the end. And Dan has already submitted questions ahead of time, and we're prepared to address those as well. And so, the FY21 budget, when we talk about it in context, we talk about, first of all, in regard to scale, Wakefield Public Schools employs 567 adults and 7 bargaining units to educate 3,510 students in grades pre-K through 12. That's preschool, the Doyle Early Learning Center. So it's pre-K through 12, as well as post-academy, which is our 18 to 22-year-old program, which is run in partnership with the Reading Public Schools. When we think about building a budget, one of the things that we adhere to is an instructional strategy. That is a research-based strategy, and it's broken down into what we call the academic core. I can talk about that a bit. One of the things that's important to us is that, we have all of the stakeholders and all voices are heard in regard to staff, and that includes principals, teachers, paraeducators. Everyone who works for the Wakefield Public Schools has an opportunity to participate in the kind of the prioritization and to give feedback on budgeting and how we're building our budget. Parents and community members also participate in this process. So one of the things that we talk about is kind of, a values-based judgment around, building a budget in regard to what the Wakefield Public Schools need to continue on its trajectory to excellence and to improve steadily year over year. And last, and one of the things that I think is probably most important to talk about and to be able to talk about now more than ever is to build fiscally responsive and sustainable budgets year over year. This is just a very quick snapshot of our timeline. We start in October, November, where we get out and we meet with faculty and staff. We do coffee feedback sessions. We submit capital priorities to DPW. We've worked very closely with Joe Conway this year. He and Bob Shiroli have been a terrific match, and that we think Joe has been a great partner for us on the school side. And so in December, on December 17th and 18th this year, principals and directors got together and we did kind of a bottom-up build. They have a number of students that are in their school, and they need to quantify and qualify all of their staff members in regard to needs. One of the things that we pretty closely adhere to in asking them to both quantify and qualify needs for their school is, you know, can we start off by thinking about reconstituting or thinking differently or flexibly about the budget that you are currently working with, or the footprint that you're currently working with within your schools. So that's a process that we go through, and that's an open meeting. School committee members attend that meeting. In January, we continue with staff and community forums. We do a state of the schools in January. We do a community and student services subcommittee survey. So part of the work that we do in collecting data, we do a community survey, but we also have a student services subcommittee survey, which I'll talk about that in a moment. We presented, or we discussed, I should say, we didn't present, we discussed preliminary budget priorities to FinCom in February. March 10th, we kind of proposed a recommended FY21 budget to school committee. On the 18th, we had a public hearing. This past Monday evening, we were at town council. On Tuesday evening, we had a school committee, and the school committee voted unanimously to support this budget. And we're here this evening. And, you know, will town meeting happen on May 4th? I mean, that's a question. My sense is that may get moved. In terms of our instructional strategy, our instructional strategy is built with a vision and mission statement in mind. You know, this is something that you hear read when we open all of our school committee meetings. And this is something that we talk about as kind of a focus for us. And so the vision of our schools is to graduate, the WPS graduates are confident, lifelong learners who are respectful and caring members of their community. And the mission is to prepare students for college, career, and community by providing rich and challenging curriculum, high quality instruction, and educational experiences that meet the needs of each student. In breaking this down into parts, we break it down into quality teaching. These three parts are kind of a research-based architecture, which are kind of focused on the core, or three parts. Teaching, you know, quality curriculum, and really thinking about meeting the students where they are and addressing individual needs. And so those three parts are really it's kind of a research-based structure out of Harvard University. It's Liz City's work. But in terms of part one, this is just a very quick summary of what quality teaching looks like. Our goal is to support, promote quality teaching by recruiting, retaining, developing exemplary teachers in the Wakefield Public Schools. Part two of our strategy is to provide rich and challenging curriculum to really give our students the very best curriculum and experiences that we can create in the classroom. And so the curriculums that we're purchasing now have a very significant technology component to them. All of our textbooks are digital, as well as we have paper copies available as well. But they're also free of bias and accessible to all students. So there are materials that come with our curriculum materials to support our growing ESL population, as well as our special education population. And we have an annual curriculum review and renewal process where this coming year, we're going to be looking very closely at our math curriculum in pre-K through 12. The third part of our strategy is really just meeting students where they're at. And so, it focuses on inclusive practices that support equity and positive outcomes for all students. So it's not just about addressing one cohort or one population of students. It's about being able to articulate in a broader range how all of our students are doing, from students that have differences in regard to learning needs to our kind of our high flyers and our honors students as well. So this year we did a community survey, and we had 569 responses, which is just shy of about double the number of respondents that we had last year. And this just gives a breakdown of what the numbers were. We had 375 parents respond. We had 135 faculty, 51 staff members, 16 administrators. So we're very pleased about that. So instead of presenting, bar graphs like I have in the past, it can get kind of confusing with the information, the way we've presented it in the past. So what we've done is we've kind of aligned the priorities that have come from the survey to our instructional strategy. So what we are, in regard to the priorities that came from quality teaching section, MSN support was a #1 priority. MSN stands for moderate special needs, which really stands for a special education teacher or special education support. So what also came from our community survey was an elementary science specialist to support continuity and instruction in science for students at the elementary level. They prioritized, the feedback that we got was reading specialists are a priority. And in terms of rigorous curriculum, the cohort really felt like a priority was STEAM support. That's science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math, as well as social, emotional, health, and learning curriculum, as well as more computer science materials and offerings in grades 3 through 12. So in regard to individualized student learning, the #1 priority was, again, math and reading support, intervention services, and counseling services. District priorities and information that came from this survey included a digital learning specialist as a priority, increased student learning time, a director of human resources, a humanities coordinator at the elementary level, more traffic supervisor support. As things get busier in Wakefield, some of our intersections are becoming a little treacherous in regard to getting students from point A to point B. Custodial help was highlighted, as well as wireless upgrades, which was just addressed in the capital presentation. And so in our student services subcommittee, which is a subcommittee of our school committee, we surveyed students, teachers, and parents in grades 5 and 9. And the priorities that came back from those surveys for students, it included homework support, counseling and special education support, STEAM offerings. Students also thought we could increase offerings for clubs and enrichment. Our teachers prioritized organizational support for students. Again, counseling and special education support, writing support, which we have a plan for in grades 9 through 12, and we hope to be rolling out in next year's budget. And the next part of that is internships and service opportunities for students. For parents, the priorities were, again, organizational support, counseling support, internships, and writing, as well as computer science offerings. So you'll see that there's a coordination and an alignment between the two different surveys. And it was also prioritized in our meetings with teachers, parents, and stakeholders as well. So there's kind of a nice alignment when we meet with different audiences in terms of what they feel needs to increase. We know we can't do it all at once, but we believe we can prioritize and do this over time. One of the things that we tried to approach this budget at, if we can't get something into the budget, maybe we need to just take a step back and maybe think about not now, not yet. I'll talk more about that in a moment. In terms of special education, we continue to develop and support in-district programming for all learners. For the last 2 years, we have come in under budget in regard to our out-of-district programming, which I think is a testament to the hard work of Lynn O'Neill and her leadership team. as well as Cara Morrow and Christine Bufagna. I think we always get this question: can you build programs in district to keep students in district to save money? So it's spending money to save money. And that is something, that's a philosophy that we always adhere to when thinking about either expanding positions or expanding programs. What is the cost benefit analysis? If a student were to go out to a private placement and it cost $100,000 or $200,000 a year, can we hire a teacher for $80,000 and a paraeducator for $35,000 or 1.5 paraeducators and develop a program in district that might be able to keep them here year over year at a decreased cost? It's a savings to the district. It's also a tremendous benefit to the student. And so just other things to consider in regard to we are developing, our professional development offerings have increased with a focus on special education topics and instructional strategies to meet the needs of all learners. In this priority, we are proposing the addition of 5 new positions. And I want to be clear here that in listening to and getting feedback from all of the principals and all of our administrators and directors, the total number of positions that were proposed this year were 14.1 positions. And so we have, we haven't said no to those positions necessarily. We've said no for now. We've deprioritized and prioritized. And in that process, we feel the 5 positions that we're proposing are really appropriate. We think that they're what students need and what our community needs. So the 2 full-time equivalent science teachers at elementary in this budget for FY21 are really an add to create more continuity in the instruction that's happening at upper elementary, at grades 3, and for FY21, it will be mostly grade 4. But we're looking to do that to give students, again, more continuity, not only in experience, but also in the schedule of teaching science. And we're also looking to prepare students to participate at a higher level at the middle school. We know our grade 5 and grade 8 science MCAS scores are not where we want them to be. And part of that reason is because our elementary teachers just can't fit as much into their schedules as we would like. And so this 2 FTE add for science specialists, we really think will serve teachers well, serve students well, and we also feel like it aligns with all of the survey data that came back in regard to support and offering increased offerings in science. So the next 3 positions that we're seeking to add are for special education services, which these added positions are for services that students are entitled to under their IEP, okay? And so we're seeking to add 1 FTE at Dolbear. We have an exceptional autism program at Dolbear, and that program needs more support, and the students in that program need additional support is probably a better way to say it. But we're proposing to add 1 FTE there. We're proposing to add 1 FTE at Galvin Middle School that will support our language-based programming as well as programming in the classroom. We're seeking to add a 0.5 FTE at Greenwood Elementary, and we're seeking to add a 0.5 FTE at Doyle for speech and language services. And so those are the 5 FTE. So, teachers, principals, and directors were proposing not only increases in their budgets, but they were also seeking, again, and they've made, I think, a very appropriate case to add a number of positions, but we prioritized these 5. And so in one of the questions that Dan asked, excuse me, I'm just putting my cursor over. One of the questions that Dan asked is, do any of these bills relate to FY22? And science does. We're seeking to add 2 teachers in FY21, 2 science specialists, as well as 2 FTE in FY22. So the other bullets that this budget also supports is support for teachers to work on instructional leadership teams at pre-K through 4. And so they're doing this work now. And the way we were creating that time for teachers to do that work is we were calling in building subs and we were trying to schedule this work during the day. We've moved this to outside of the school day. So this budget would allow us to do that. It allows for a new nurse coordinator stipend. It allows for new funding for teachers to work on formative data. And so as our science specialists are working in grade 4, upper elementary, and teachers would also have time to work on data teams to track student progress and to really work on the third part of our instructional strategy, which is to really focus on growth and focus on what students need. The new teacher contract, we do have a new tentative agreement with the teachers. They're working on ratifying that their side of it, and then it will go back to school committee when they're done there. This budget proposal also includes a new transportation contract because our contract was up. So one of the things that I've highlighted, I want to say consistently since our tri-board meeting back in the early fall, is really trying to take a long view. And you know, one of the things that I talked to our administrators about is really taking a 7 to 10 year plan in regard to, you know, improvement cycles, in regard to building programs, in regard to really looking at building something that can last over time. I think this long view is probably more critical now than ever before, with all that we are facing in regard to the current situation with the coronavirus. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that in my last few slides. But we're seeking to collaborate with town leaders to create a 7 to 10 year facilities master plan, which, you know, we've already started. We've had 2 MSBA grant proposals accepted as SOIs, which includes either the renovation or new construction of Wakefield Memorial High School. It includes a new roof at the Greenwood, but our plan also takes into consideration other needs of the town, as well as where we are economically. So I can talk more about that as we go. So we're also looking to create a data and budget plan to accommodate learning ready facilities at, again, Greenwood and the high school. We're looking to complete an enrollment study because we know that even if the economy turns, which we know it is turning, but there are a number of units that are being built in Wakefield which will impact our schools. So we're seeking to do an enrollment study. And we want to do an enrollment study really for 2 reasons. One, to really understand what the needs are of the students moving in and be prepared to meet those needs, and to understand any additional special education services or ESL services that we may need to provide. But also because to really nail down enrollment, it equals square footage if you're renovating or building new in working with MSBA. So rising costs of special education programming are always an issue. You know, we could technically take positions off the table, but if students are entitled to get these positions, if we were to do that and they were to go out of district, it would be, you know, it would not be the benefit, the cost benefit would not be appropriate. So we really need to look closely at special education programming, and we continue to do that. Again, for the last 2 years, our out of district placements are down. We have not accessed special education stabilization since the town funded that. And so we're very pleased about that as well. So we need to look at our English language learners, or our ESL population. Those numbers are increasing, and they have probably doubled since I've been here in the 5 years I've been in. You know, you saw the priorities in regard to increasing STEAM and computer science fields. And at the high school level, we're really seeking to increase early college and internships for students. as well as addressing a budget that can really focus on what students need. So the three major areas that we look at when we present our budget are, one, our personnel costs, which again make up about 80% of our budget. There are 7 bargaining units, 567 employees. Our operational costs are something that we work every year at to really try to keep costs down. And special education costs are an area that we work on every year, and that will continue to be a conversation year over year. So in regard to the increases this year, we're seeking an increase in $1.493 million, which is a 3.56% increase in personnel, a 0.35% increase in stipends, and the new positions that we're adding are $139,000 or 0.33%. And the total there for personnel increases for this year are 4.25%. And so operating costs, I'm not going to read the whole slide, but our increase in operating costs, which includes our new transportation contract, is only increased by 0.5% this year to $211,000. In terms of special education, the 3 new positions that we're seeking to add is $168,000. And again, our out-of-district tuitions have come in under budgeted. So the total increase between the new positions that we're adding and the out-of-district tuitions is only 0.12% or $52,000. So when you put all of the cost areas together, we are proposing a net total of $2.45 million or 4.88%. We do know that we're going to have an increase of at least $129,000 in Chapter 70. We're anticipating that it's going to come in more than that or higher than that. But the budget that we're recommending is $4.39 million. And so I'll be happy to answer any questions that anyone may have moving forward.
Thank you, Doug. So what I'd like to do is get to participants, and let's see. I don't know if anybody from the school subcommittee, Pete, Jim, Brian, or Gerard want to speak to, what you guys have learned and have your thoughts.
Yeah, this is Peter. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think Doug did a really good job of bringing into context the entire budget and where the school budget lies in relation to the overall budget. And I think that's important for for the new members that we have on FinCom, that they understand that this budget of $44 million represents approximately 43% of the total budget. And then with just direct expenses, and then if you go ahead and you add, the benefits, it comes out to, in ballpark somewhere 5% of the total budget. So just to give it some scope in context, this is the equivalent if it was in the private sector. This is a medium to large company that Doug is essentially the CEO and Christine is the CFO, and dealing with, with all these complexities. So just wanted to, add that context for the new members of FinCom, and then just take a minute to, extend the thanks to the members of the school department subcommittee, and that included Amy Purcell, Tom Markham, and Chris Callahan. And again, just for the folks in the FinCom, the members of our subcommittee, Gerard Lehman, Jim Sullivan, and Brian Cusack, and myself. But again, a thank you to Superintendent Lyons, that this is his second cycle in preparing a Wakefield budget. and the school business administrator, Christine Bufagna, and this is her first cycle in delivering a Wakefield budget. While at the same time, as Doug mentioned, they were meeting the requirements to secure the MSBA funding partnership to build the new high school, addressing the Greenwood School roof renovations, grinding through the ongoing Unit A contract renovations, and again, most recently administering the appropriate measures to keep our students and teachers safe during these unprecedented times driven by the coronavirus. So thanks to them, and thanks to my peers, my committee members.
All right, thank you, Pete. I don't, Brian, Gerard, or Jim, do you guys have anything to add to Pete's comments?
I'm waiting for Gerard.
Well, don't wait, just jump in.
I'm trying to change my reputation, Brian. Thank you. Yeah, I think what Doug just presented is at least consistent with some of the questions and answers we went through when he visited for the pre-discussion a couple of meetings ago. There's really no upward surprises in the down P&L, as I like to say, operational costs. So I thank him for that detail at this one. The main show, of course, is still personnel costs. I asked one question during his open forum, the community that Chris was kind enough to dispatch. It's an ultra detailed, but I'll just enter it for everyone's awareness. I just asked about the program to offset the user fees and activities and things like that, which Chris relayed to the public is, didn't take place last year. It's not the budget. My question precisely, I don't know if it was exactly read precisely in the forum, was, does this budget reflect a continuance, an abeyance, or a retraction of that program to offset the user fee impact to activity participants? And Chris pointed out that it does not continue to offset that. So in case anyone was wondering about that bit of detail that is somewhere down in the weeds, this budget does not continue to reduce user fees. So Doug, am I right in concluding then that we're still kind of flat on that, but we did not retract or go back to raising user fees at all as a result of this?
Correct.
Thank you. So I'll throw it to Jim or Brian at this point, so I don't monopolize.
So I did, Doug, if you would be willing to opine about the Chapter 70 funding and the conversation that we had about how the state has kind of changed their view of those funds. Do you remember that conversation we had?
I do. And so one of the things that we discussed at our subcommittee meeting was this requirement around accountability. So the state issues us kind of targets that we need to make with subgroups of students. And they're often students that are at risk or in a high needs area. And so, they develop targets and they give you an accountability rating based on how you're meeting those targets. They also want an accounting of what resources have been dedicated to help those students achieve. And so I think that we've done a good job with a lot of our subgroups. I think I speak for all of the administrators when I say I don't think that we are pleased at kind of all of the progress that we've made. We feel like there's still a lot of work and a lot of growth for us to make. But those are the types of metrics that are created at the state level in regard to holding us accountable, not only with how students are growing and improving, but also with the dollars that we're assigning to groups. And so that's something that is an important part of this now. This really started a few years ago when the state really started to talk about, ROI, or return on investment for certain types of grants that they're offering. So does that reflect, does that sound pretty close to what we discussed?
Yep. And then are there any contracts outstanding at this point? Like in terms of what's reflected in the budget, or are we all good there?
We are, well, I mean, the teachers have not ratified their contract yet.
Okay.
We're assuming that that's going to happen in the coming days. And as soon as they do that, you know, we'll kind of support that and get school committee back together to have a vote to approve that as well. But everything is represented fully for all 7 collective bargaining agreements in this contract.
And that's reflected in this budget that we have in front of us, or not?
Yeah, it is. Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Great. Thank you.
Jim, you want to chime in, or are you good?
Now, the other thing I would add is I think we had our first meeting, I don't know if it was in August. It was pretty early on. And I will just say that, you know, while I was kind of, you know, just in general disappointed that we didn't get the budget till late, you know, when you look, as, you know, Unit A negotiation, it represents about 60% of the budget. So, you know, I can understand through Doug's process how significant, you know, that negotiation is and the potential impact on the budget. So I lean a little latitude in the process. I thought we met early. I thought it was well managed by Peter, but you know, in the end, we all didn't get the budget numbers till late. But I find it, you know, somewhat understandable, and I just share that. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Jim. What I'll do now is just open it up to the rest of the Finance Committee. So if you could electronically raise your hands, we'll start with whoever hand pops up first. And Don's first. Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, so the increase this year, it looks like it's 4.8% year over year. Do you have trends on the number of students year over year and the per student costs year over year as well?
Our per pupil expenditure? Is that?
Yes.
So we do have our per pupil expenditure, and so the short answer is yes.
Okay. And do you know what the rate increase has been per pupil year over year?
I'm wondering if Christine Bufagna might be able to help us out in regard to the per pupil. If not, I can pull it up.
It is tracked on the DESE website, and it's tracked by community. So if you were interested in digging into it, it's sort of pulled when we file the end of year report, and it's pulled by, it's not just, there is by all categories, but then it drills down by subgroup. So it talks about what Doug was speaking about, SPED population, ESL population, because some categories are more expensive to educate than others. We didn't build this budget by a per pupil because we basically built it from the ground up. We met with every department head and every principal about the needs of the school. But you can see from our trends, I think, I don't have it here, but on the DESE website about what we're trending. And that's, it also helps to build from our funding formula.
Okay, so the 3,510 students that you're factoring in here, how does that compare to the previous year?
It's pretty consistent. It's pretty consistent. We've had some students in district and we've had some students out of district. But it's been, if you look at our trend, it's pretty flat. You know, one of the things that we did in getting ready for our tri-board meeting and was to kind of look at the number of additional students that we've gotten from the construction so far in town. So, you know, we've essentially got 50 new students, which are like 2 classrooms. But between students in and out, it's been about the same. Can I just say, in regard to your question about per pupil, so the Wakefield per pupil is $14,500 this year. So,
which is just slightly above the state average, I believe.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to just pull that up for you.
But we're fortunate that our enrollment is staying steady because that is what drives the funding formula. But we are going to be starting an enrollment study for the new construction that's going on in the town. And it's going to help drive our costs for MSBA, looking at either rebuilding or building a new high school.
Don, are you all set?
Yes, thanks.
All right, Evan, your hand is up next. Go ahead, Evan.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to expand on this enrollment conversation. We're talking about the enrollment study to largely because of this sort of recent local boom in residential growth. And I think I wanted to ask Steve Mayo probably, haven't these studies already been done with each project as part of the planning board permitting process? Usually, in my experience, the applicant has to come in and take a good look at the impact the growth will have on schools, on emergency services, et cetera. So don't we have a decent idea of what we're talking about here without having to conduct another study?
I can answer that. Well, you never know until they're built, number one.
Yeah.
We did some actual numbers as part of the tri-board meeting and found that with the exception of where they were 3-bedroom units, we did not see a big increase in students at all. Other services, of course, you know, that goes without saying. But I think that Doug mentioned the numbers. I thought it was pretty flat around. They hadn't been huge. But yes, in those larger projects, we do ask for an economic report, or the planning board or the Board of Appeals does. But again, you don't know until people move in. And with the economy now, I don't know if we had an economic report 2 years ago, if that would be, you know, when they first came in, it would be worth it. Things might change. So, yeah.
Okay. I mean, you know, I agree. You never know until it comes. It's true of any projections in any field, but I don't think a new study is going to make it any more useful. I don't think it's going to change that fact if we have yet another study projecting something that we won't know until they're in the ground. So, and better that they're actually to revenue and have occupancy. But I'll stop for now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Evan. Jan, you're up next.
I had a question. If anything was factored in on the recent meetings that you have had regarding, you know, the school being closed down for a month and what those expenses would look like should it happen again, and the extra cost that it might be to get networks up and going for an expended period of time. Has that been discussed, that, you know, it would that balance each other out between the actual physical buildings not being used as opposed to any networks and online expenses?
I'm not sure I completely understand the question. If your question is, are we looking at the impacts financially of having school shut down versus having school open? You know, I think we're having those conversations daily. I think we're looking at all of our expenses, all of our revolving accounts. You know, we're creating, I think, plans to look at, you know, any monies that parents have paid to date, you know, expenditures or refunds that we may need to give in regard to tuition or after school programming or spring sports, et cetera. And so I think we do this. We're constructing a few different plans right now. I was just talking to Steve about this morning. And so that I can tell you we are doing, but I'm not sure I understood the part of your question when you were asking about networks. Could you more?
I guess I was just asking, you know, because there's a lot more online things that are being done.
Yeah.
Is there any extra expense that needs to be added in on networking or the IT side of the budget?
Maybe.
Right now, we're just making sure everyone has a Chromebook, access to online for Learn Anywhere or any online classes or Google Classroom or anything like that they have access to. We've been working with all the principals, all the teachers, But right now, we're just kind of really reevaluating where we are. So we haven't really seen any spikes in IT costs at this time. But we don't know how long it's going to last either.
So I think I would add there, Jan, that what we are doing as well is we're trying to make it work with the resources that we have. I don't think anyone anticipated, this coronavirus and all that would come with it, right? And so, we have machines at schools and now we're, when families don't have machines, computers, we're delivering those computers to students so that they can work outside of school. What does that mean in the long run? Right now, we don't know. We're kind of really working out a plan week by week. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thanks.
So Jan, you're all set?
Yes.
All right, next up is Stefan. You might want to unmute your mic and ask your question.
Thanks, Dan. I just had a question about the Chapter 70 funds and the expectation that they will increase for FY21.
Yeah.
I guess given the current state of the day,
yeah,
does that assumption still hold true with Chapter 70 funds?
I think it does hold true. Excuse me. I think yes. I think we're anticipating. The number that we were working with was the governor's number, and the House and Senate hadn't given us a final number yet. But to be honest, I would anticipate that might come even higher than what they had initially budgeted. And the reason is because I think that they too, like us and every school district right now, are really trying to think about what they need to do to stay, to stimulate the economy and to support programs and what students need. So I'm anticipating that the number that we shared in the slides tonight is going to increase. How much, I don't know at this point in time, Stefan.
Stefan, you're all set?
All set, thank you.
All right, Gerard, you're up.
Thanks, Dan. Hey, Doug, just given the volume of time we spent talking about special education at Subcom, I wanted to ask a question about one of your earlier remarks. And given the headcount study, the enrollment study that is forthcoming, I'm wondering, given your remarks about Dolbear being a particular center of excellence for autism, I think a lot of informed parents in the district would agree with that. Have you guys explored in this current headcount additional need, whether creating Dolbear as a center of excellence for all autistic students at the elementary level, to go there to kind of achieve some efficiency gains or effectiveness gains in a manner we've done with Woodville in the past? Not sure if that was factored in, or if you could speak to that at all. Does centralizing like we've done in the past for special needs generally maybe help offset the need for a lot of headcounts either this year or next or in the future?
We've had that discussion, and I think that we've looked at it both ways. A few years ago, Gerard, I don't know if you recall, but we used to schedule all of our elementary students that had English language learner needs, our ESL kids, we sent them all to Woodville. And when we did that, it made, because everyone was in one position at one time, there was a benefit. The cost of doing that, or the difficulty in doing that, really was that you're taking students out of their community, right? So we're taking kindergartners that had a social network in their neighborhood, and they might have lived in the Greenwood area, so that they were playing with kids, being around kids, and they were actually part of their support network. We were taking those kids out of those relationships and sending them across town to school, right? And so what we did was we added one FTE and had hired an additional ESL teacher, and we were able to move kids back into their home elementary schools. And we saw a big, jump in how much language kids were learning because they were supported socially outside of school as well as in school. So that's an example. But to answer your question, yes, we're doing that. I think what we do is we look at the first question is always, can the student be educated in their home school to start? And then if not, then we think about programming and movement.
I appreciate that. Dan, if you permit a second question, a little bit off this topic, but given we have recent legislation as past couple days in relation to COVID-19, I'm wondering if anyone, either in the school administration or the town administration more generally, has had a chance to assess whether new demands are coming down on schools because of, I don't know, who knows, persistent distancing recommendations, things like that. But have you either detected anything unfunded or funded that's coming down as federal mandates or state mandates that you think we have to keep an eye on as a town, as a district? Well, I'll stop there. That's just, we should all be looking out for it, I think, as the uncertain kind of rolls out, I guess. So I'll stop with that.
Thanks. I think one of the things that is one of our greatest concerns right now is equity in how students might be participating in their learning outside of school. So what does learning look like for students that have disabilities? And so I think one of the things that some districts have done, so initially the federal DOE said that school districts, if you're not providing any service during the shutdown, then you don't have to worry about students with needs. And so some districts took the course of action to say, you know what, because we're concerned that we might not be able to meet all students' needs, we're not going to provide any service. And so we did not take that tack. With our Learn Anywhere program, which we know is a snow day program, not an extended learning or distance learning program, we said, we're going to take our best shot and try to provide some services for students to create some psychological safety and to create some routines for parents and for students so that they can participate some way in their learning, right? With that happening, there's some positive and there are some challenges. I think the challenges that we're preparing for right now, Gerard, are additional costs and structures that we're going to need to create. For example, extended year services. If students can come back in May and we are moving into the summer where we have a summer program for students with special needs, what we are talking about is really baselining our students and really talking about extending services during the summer to give them the best opportunity to start school on their best footing in the fall. So the short answer is yes, as well as our teachers are doing, and there's a lot to be proud of and a lot of good work happening right now with distance learning. With that said, there's still some tremendous areas of growth and some significant unknowns that I think we're creating some solutions for, but we're really chipping away. But in regard to budget and cost, I think one of the first places that's going to impact is our extended year services in the summer. But I believe that that's going to carry over to the fall. But I think that that's our responsibility to figure out. And if we have a cost overrun, I think we need to use, our finance and facilities subcommittee and our liaisons to problem solve and come up with solutions that we can live with.
Thanks for that. Yeah. So to Dan or Steve, I'd say that's probably right on. If it's a November town meeting contingency type conversation, great. Just kind of makes sense to look at. So that's it for me, Dan. Thanks.
All right. Yeah, I haven't seen anything, by the way. Steve, do you want to chime in? Have you seen anything?
Yeah, a couple of things that may affect us on 111F, which is where police and fire are compensated for job-related injuries. There may be a feeling that any COVID-19 issues will be treated as a job-related injury for police and fire, which means that there will be some more costs there and indemnification costs there. I'm way more worried right now about the revenue side than anything else. I hate to disagree with the rosy picture, but I think that our state aid will decrease in fiscal year 21. The positive is that we didn't get that much more in Chapter 70 than last year anyway. So it's not that we're losing a lot, but my read of what's going on in Beacon Hill is that they're really concerned about revenues for fiscal year 21. And, it's kind of like when when the king gets a cold, the hoi polloi get pneumonia. So I would be concerned with that. I'm concerned with the revenue coming in, as is Doug, on some of the after-school programs, on our rec programs, and we're not holding our rec programs right now. I'm concerned about some of the rentals that we charge in our town buildings. So I think there's a revenue problem, but we'll survive.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Let's see, next up is Doug Butler, and Stefan, you might want to lower your hand.
He has more.
Hey, Doug. Just, a few questions. One, I know that you said that the budget negotiations sort of they're not ongoing. You've got a tentative agreement and that everything's sort of in place waiting for the teachers' approval. It's one of my concerns is the contract that is tentative, is it either front loaded, or how are we accounting for the raises that they're going to get for fiscal year 20 in terms of the budget? And also, it isn't overly backdated. You said it was, fiscal year 21's budget could substantially meet the needs of this contract. But if the fiscal year 22, benefits given out are in excess of what you're doing for 21, then all of a sudden we're not faced with the 4.8 one year, we're faced with 5 or a 5.25 next year as well. I think that's one of my concerns. So you can talk about, if you can talk about that, that would be great.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I believe that you asked the question, Doug, a few years ago, where you said, you guys, us administrators, have created a contract where personnel costs are over 4%. And I think your question was, could you please not do that again? If I remember that correctly.
I think that was probably more Dan than me, but yeah.
Oh, okay. But I think that, one of the things that we've done is moving forward is our personnel costs are under 4%. I think we've kind of taken that feedback to heart, and we've tried to do some forecasting. And so I think the budget that we have currently so there's money in there to support the teacher agreement. And so we're prepared to do that for our FY21 budget. It will support the new proposals as well. And so I don't know that it would be prudent for me to go into exactly what the COLA is for the agreed upon contract at this point in time, because it's not ratified. But I do think it's in keeping with other cost of living increases that have been given out on the school side.
Sure. I think my question is more like, we're not doing a 1% raise in fiscal year 20, a 2.5% raise in fiscal year 21, and then a 7% raise in fiscal year 22.
No, definitely not.
Okay. I think this is probably more on your finance director's side. Help me understand the difference in the sort of DESI function summaries and the district programs and services budget. So it's sort of page 59 and 60. And really, it looks like there's a ton of money coming out of that district programs at the DESI level. And it's changing. And I understand it's not apples for apples all the time, but it's really hard to get a gauge of it seems like a lot of money must have moved out of district and to the school level. And I'm trying to understand what happened there and like what that's all about. So if you see like page 60, you've got the DESI budget, the district programs is shrinking by 14%, but it's really not. It's really up at the top. It's growing by 5% or so. or yeah, it's growing from, so it went from 9.7 2 years ago to 12 to 12.6 or 12.68. But in the DESI budget, it looks like it's going from 9.9 to last year 11, or this current year 11.2, and now it's at 9.6. So I'm just like, it's real. Your budget's, you know, look, your budget's the biggest one by far, so it's relatively hard to follow. But it's trying to figure out, like, what are we moving around in that district piece?
So at the top of page 60, when it talks about summary by school site, I think that's what you're referring to.
Yep.
So what that does, it breaks down year over year by school, and then it talks about district programs. And what we've done is we've taken into account that negative 1.599. That talks about circuit breaker.
Yeah, okay, so.
That's a revenue stream to the town. So we get, district programs talk about sped out of district tuitions. So we're saying all we're asking for from the town would be 43.9. But if we didn't get circuit breaker, which is almost $1.6 million, our actual costs for out of district would be much higher. You would see it would be more like 12 million.
Sure. So are you saying that 1.59, the difference on page 60 for the DESI programs, you're telling me that the 1.599 is somehow tied to that 1.659?
Yes, yes. District programs, it's not just sped, it's
that's fine, but then in the previous year, why wasn't it tied to it? Because then in the previous year, like, the circuit breaker only went up by, like, I don't know, $79,000, and this is dropping the overall district budget by 1.6 million. So that, either you changed what you did for fiscal 20 to 21, or there's something that, you definitely changed something for fiscal 20 to 21. I just need to know what it is.
I wasn't here for that budget book, so I can't really speak to how that was prepared. But in terms of what's proposed for this year, we're telling you that what's needed in terms of town appropriation would be, the net would be the difference between what circuit breaker is going to fund versus what the town's going to fund. So that would be the difference between the 41.9 for 20 and the 43.9 for 21.
Right, but you're still not sort of telling me, like, on one side of the sheet, you're telling me that all of these things are growing by double digits, and on the other side, you're telling me that they're growing by low to mid single digits. And it's all this, you moved a bunch of money in district programs from one place to the other. I just don't know where you moved, where it came from.
So the top is basically an all funds budget. It's telling you by school site what is needed to run those schools. What it's telling you is that the difference is circuit breaker.
So all of those schools, that matches up, that 3839, that everything else there. So then you just, you essentially pulled all the circuit breaker money out of, like, so every bit of circuit breaker money. So the 1.5, the million, you pulled it all out of the 12.6.
Right, because it's a district program for sped out of district.
Okay, so that gets me to, like, and then this, I guess, is now more for Doug because you weren't here. So what happened last year, Doug? Why is that not, like, it went from 12, you only took 800,000 out last year as opposed to the 3 million, 3.4 million?
I'm not sure, Doug. I think we could kind of work on that and get back to you in the morning.
Sure, I think it's just that you can see that, and as well, you can see that the differences in the budget totals for the school. So I guess that's my concern, is trying to understand what's changing within the schools, or if anything is, or if you're just taking that pile of money and saying, like, let's just take this off the top and we'll budget these schools as they are. So interestingly, so budgeting the schools as they are with ignoring whatever money you took out for circuit breakers last year, all the schools going up by, like, 9.5%, but that's X the circuit breaker money.
Right.
And grants and everything else.
I think what it's showing you too is by the schools, how the schools are growing by personnel costs. But when you get down to the bottom, it's how some of those other revenue streams are offsetting some of those salaries. Circuit breakers being reimbursed by 1.6. The grant salary offset, the grants are over $1 million just for salaries. So if we didn't have those revenue streams, our budget ask would be probably almost $46 million.
Yeah, I understand, that I'm comfortable with. And
But we're just trying to show where the cost increase by category are coming. And we're showing.
But so that's my question to you. Like, so like, let's take the Doyle just as a side example. So last year, the Doyle in your, like, however you offset it last year, the Doyle was scheduled to cost $886,000 for, it was budgeted at 886. And then this year, the Doyle is budgeted at 1605.
The Doyle last year was 1465.
No. Go to the next page.
What page are you on?
Yeah, if you go to page 60, where you have the DESI function summaries, the Doyle is budgeted at 886. It's because
it's an all fund budget. It's reducing. It's telling you what to ask from the town, not grant funded. The Doyle gets a huge amount of SPED grants. So this is why the ask from the town is 41.9.
Great. I love that. I just want to know, like, why did we change? You know, why did we change what we were doing? It's more just trying to make these things reconcile.
You're
And
just
that's where it gets,
how the grants were represented last year versus this year.
yeah, it's trying to figure out, you know, you've got all your offsets, you've lumped all the offsets together, and I guess previously they like apportioned them to each school.
Right.
And that, you know, that just gets hard. And then Doug, I don't think I got an answer on, like, what do we think the expected change, like, what are we gonna have to do around, and this is maybe Doug and Dan, what are we gonna have to do with the retro pay for fiscal year 20 in the new contract? I'm gonna assume that there's a raise for everybody.
There is.
Yeah, and I assume it's retro, and that's great. That everybody deserves it. It's more just what do we have to do there, Dan? Is it a reserve fund transfer? Because you've already been harping about how, like, we're short on cash.
Doug, it's already in our budget. So
No. It's not in your fiscal 20 budget, is it?
Yeah,
it is.
it's in it.
Dan?
Yeah, I'm agreeing. I let me nod my head. Yes, it's in the budget.
Okay.
I think a good lawyer would say that question was asked and answered.
I think a good lawyer would. If only, it seems like if only we had the guy from WCAT still on.
All right, you're all set, Doug?
I am all set. Thank you,
All right.
Doug. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you, Doug.
All right, Jim is next. Jim, your hand's up. Go ahead.
Yep, thanks. Doug Butler actually answered one of my questions, because he had the same question that Doug was wrestling with, pages 59 and 60. So that was very helpful. I guess my question is, on the budget, the operating costs are going up by a small amount. What is it, 0.5%?
Yes.
So what are you worried about in there? I appreciate a tight budget, and I'm worried about what could run over in that grouping.
What are we worried about?
Yeah, so, you know, I have page 25 on my screen up, you know, and utilities going up $4,700. It's 1/10 of 1%. I just wonder, you know, if these have been budgeted appropriately. Is it a 5-year historical average being used? You know, so.
Yeah, we've looked at the actuals for the past 3 years for utilities, and we felt we were in range, except for a few areas, few schools that were running high. But we really, I mean, this being my first budget in Wakefield, I spent a lot of time with principals about just because something has been budgeted in a certain line historically for a past couple of years, do we want to leave it there? Do we want to reallocate it? So we really went through a lot of schools. We went through a lot of lines, and we just really reallocated between lines. So it really wasn't an increase to their overall budget, but it was moving from textbooks to instructional materials, between technology or contracted services. But it was really having those conversations about, just because it's been there in that line, where should we move it to? So we were talking about interventionists and how important your school. So I think that was really a great conversation for me to have, being new to Wakefield, and a conversation for the principals to really think, you know, almost start at a zero budget and really build it that way, rather than, I think they were afraid sometimes to say, well, I was afraid if I asked to move it, I would lose it. So now, you know, we're kind of having those conversations about, you know, maybe I don't need so much in textbooks, but I want to move it to interventionists, or I want to move it to contracted services for some PD on some curriculum. So we really had a lot of those conversations. So I think that's why you didn't see such a big increase in some of the operational costs, because they were able to just move between what they already had.
All right, and then my other question is, a few years ago, we started something new, Doug, with transportation, doing our own transportation or something that, how's that been running?
I think it's worked well for us. I think, you know, when we're, I think we've again, spent some money to save some money. And I think that has worked really well, Jim. You know, in terms of the actual cost savings, I can't give it to you right now off the top of my head, but, you know, I'm sure we've saved at least, you know, 30% in costs, if not more.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Those are my questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim. Evan, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm actually still stuck, and forgive me if I'm making anybody repeat themselves, but I'm stuck on pages 59 and 60 here. Particularly page 60. And there's all these like big double-digit percentages, and I'm stuck on sort of what Doug said about, are you reallocating stuff? And you sort of suggested that you had, and it looks like you did a lot of it. Am I looking at an expense sheet here on page 60? It's not a revenue sheet. Is it some mix? Are you factoring in revenue offsets to some of these FY21 numbers, or especially the change column here, where we're talking about a $1.6 million reduction in district programs? Is that what we're talking about? Did you factor in revenue offsets here?
So page 60 talks about two different things. The top, it does a summary by school site, but it doesn't talk about where the revenue is coming from. It's just talking about overall this budget book by site. And the bottom talks about DESE function codes, because we have to report to the state by those function codes. So we thought it would be helpful to explain how much of the budget is allocated to leadership, to instructional services, to student services. So that's the bottom portion of that. Outside placement is basically what the local budget is paying for sped out of district. So the top is talking about, it's almost a summary of what the town has to pay versus all those outside revenue sources. So it talks about grants, it talks about revolving accounts, it talks about user fees. So I think what is throwing people off is, in 21, we wanted to show how basically circuit breaker is the biggest revenue stream for those district programs. That and overall the grants for some of the salaries. So I think if you're trying to tie, and I think that's what people are doing, they're trying to tie from page 59 to 60. Is that where your question is, about how the increase by personnel versus the increase by revenue, right?
I think
sort of. I'm trying to to put it a little bit more simply, I'm just trying to understand what I'm looking at. And it sounds like to revisit my original question, page 60, you factored in revenue offsets here to show sort of a net appropriation number
We had to, right? We had to show you why we were asking for 4,300.
Okay, but that's the answer, right? So you factored in this $1.6 million reduction in district programs. That's you're factoring in positive revenue offsets, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And 59 is more of an expense roll-up summary?
Right. Right.
Okay.
I think you make a great point, Evan, and the short answer is yes, but I probably should break that out differently next year so it's a little bit easier to understand, because it is confusing.
I appreciate that, Doug. I get confused, and I'm not an accountant, and I would defer to the professionals in the group who understand accounting principles a little bit better than I do. But I generally don't like to see revenue offsets mixed into an expense line, because it just makes it hard to understand what we're looking at, and then you don't understand what your baseline data looks like. And so if the change has been Christine came in, did a new budget, decided to sort of line it up differently, then the historical comparisons on that page, on page 60, mean really nothing to us, because it's apples and oranges, you know. So that would be, I appreciate your comment, Doug. And I guess I would encourage looking at it in the next budget cycle, because it is a little bit confusing, and it doesn't really give a clear picture of the historical year-over-years.
Thank you for the feedback. I think we can do it better moving forward.
So Evan, you're all set?
Stefan?
All right. Stefan's up next.
Hey, just going back to my original question regarding the Chapter 70 funds. I was looking at page 12, which is, it looks like a consolidated table of all of our grants that we've received over the past years.
Yep.
Just one comment, I saw that it ends at fiscal year 2019. I was just curious why fiscal year 20 and maybe a projection for 21 is not included in that table. But also the other comment that I had was I was also trying to look for a table in here that sort of consolidates our potential, I'll call it risk exposure, for any other aspects of this this budget where you know we're seeing revenues from either state or federal agencies that may not come in at quite the levels that we are hoping for 21.
I can speak to the grants on page 12. We didn't add a fiscal 20 because when we were working on this budget, we were only halfway through fiscal 20. So what we did, if you can see on page 18, we gave you grant projections, both federal and state grant projections. And we sort of broke it down by personnel, contracted services, and supplies. But we let you know that we're just doing a projection for next year based on what we were receiving this year, because we don't know.
And the Chapter 70 funds are not included in this projection?
No, these are our grant funds, federal and state grant funds, that come directly to our district based on our student populations for SPED, Title I for lower income, Title IIA for mentoring teachers, academic support, and our MECRO program.
Yeah, so just to sum up, I guess the information request, if you can consider it that. I'm just trying to understand what the town's risk exposure is for assuming we're receiving money from outside parties that may not have it this year, given the current state of the environment.
So is that a Chapter 70 question, or is
It's all of the above. If we anticipate receiving money from the state or the federal government, and because of what is now currently happening, that's at risk. What is our risk exposure total to, essentially?
Well, our grants are entitlement grants, so they're based on our student populations. So we're projecting to still receive those. But in terms of what's happening now, if anything will change in terms of Chapter 70, I mean, I think that's still we're going to see that.
May I jump in here? Steve and I had a conversation regarding state aid, Chapter 70 for 2020. Steve, you want to relay, the conversation you had with our state representatives?
For fiscal year 2020, our state delegation and Sean Cronin, who is the head of the Division of Local Services, said that fiscal year 20 state aid will not be affected from the state. What will be affected in fiscal year 20, however, is, in my opinion, is any money that we would get in the fourth quarter for, or third and fourth quarter for local options meals taxes, because that's going to be lower because no one's eating in, well, it's not a lot of eating in restaurants. But I think that our overall revenue from other sources is on target for fiscal year 20 anyway. And Kevin, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that we're on target anyway. For fiscal year 21, I am concerned that both of those items will be down. I had a conversation with Senator Lewis, and we actually had our first laugh over Chapter 70 because I said, if you went back to fiscal year 20 levels, wouldn't hurt me so much as it hurt other guys. So, I'm concerned with fiscal year 21 in revenues coming in. Another part of that will be excise taxes because people aren't buying cars. I think car sales are down. I think I read 15%. Across the board, and that will probably come back, and there'll be pent-up demand on restaurants too when we go forward. So I think we have to be cognizant of that when we look at the whole thing. I mean, I'll be looking at going through the entire budget to see what we should look at further on everything. And candidly, I've had the same conversation with the superintendent, and he gets it too. He understands there may be some revenue issues next year. So those questions are well taken, and I think we need to look at some of those items.
Steve, did your conversation also include reimbursement for current year expenditures?
Because of this? Yes.
Because of this.
I think that that will flow through mainly through FEMA and MEMA. So I think that we can account on, and we're keeping account of every single expenditure we have. We can account on probably 75% of that coming back. So I'm feeling pretty good about that there. But what we've also spoken with our state delegation and Sean Cronin about is that on the other side of the ledger, lost revenue is something that they should be tracking too. And maybe we can get some help there as well. So it's not just an expense side, it's a lost revenue side. So we have been making those conversations too about, even recreation, program for the town, after school program for the schools. Those are all income that we are projected to use this year for programs. And, even though the programs aren't there, some of that infrastructure is still that we need to pay for. So yes, those are all added in the conversation.
Okay, you all set, Stefan?
All set, thank you.
Doug, you're up.
Okay, sorry. A couple of just other questions on the out-of-district stuff. I'm trying to understand, why is our transportation going up 65,000 when our out-of-district spending is going to go down 120?
Christine, you want to take that?
That's due to transportation. Because just because the transportation is going down for tuitions, we're still doing in-district transportation.
Oh, wait, it's under the out-of-district line item, right?
Right, are you talking about the operation costs for transportation?
Yeah, I was looking through your detailed budget on, you want to show you the page?
Yes.
Page where one goes down by, like the OOD goes down by 119, but the transportation budget goes up by 65, which feels
Yeah,
odd.
that's the transportation to keep those kids in district and to transfer them is going up, even though the tuitions are going down.
But they're not out of district transportation, are they?
Some are going to programs in other communities, but some are in the community of Wakefield. So we did an analysis of all the sped transportation costs, and we had an increase of $65,000 for next year.
Oh, so that's just, it's not out of district transportation, it's just sped transportation. So we're not paying more money to send fewer kids out of
No,
district.
it's the transportation costs.
Okay. And then like on the athletic stipends, you may have touched on that, but I'm not sure if you did. Why is that going down by so much?
What page are you on?
Let's find athletic stipends. I mean, I always look for places where there seem to be like, you know, dramatic changes.
Mm-hmm.
And
They were
so
on the high
on 3510 on page 52 for the high school program, athletic stipends have been 320, 315, 335. You're taking them down to 291. And you took non-professional salaries. Are you cutting a program? I mean, that's fine if you are. I mean, you don't
No,
have
we're
to.
not cutting a program, but we're just looking at the local budget and what to pay for from the user fees.
But you're holding user fees the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you're going to be able to save $57,000. I just, you know, okay.
No, it's reduced by $43,000.
Well, but then you're cutting the non-professional salaries by 13.
No,
So
we
like
have
I'm looking
to-
at the overall athletic
we have
services.
change in staff for
Yeah.
that.
That's, what are you doing with staff?
We did a change in staff for the clerical staff for that department.
Okay. And then,
So someone with more seniority, Doug, left, and someone with less seniority was hired.
yeah, and you know, this is the other part to like, you know, commend you guys on, because you know that's not normally my forte. So retirements were at 280 last year and are at what are they, 70 grand this year? Like, so you're
So
taking a
far,
hit of 210,000 on additional spending, which, you know, some
We've
of
only
your
heard of
departments don't do that. So talk to me about how do you gauge that?
So we ask by, I think it's January 1st, people to let us know if they're going to be retiring in that June. And so far, as of February 21st, we've only been told of 3 teacher retirements for this year. Whereas I think last year at this time, we had 8.
Are we getting younger as a department?
Hopefully.
I think we are. I don't know if I'm feeling any younger right now, Doug.
No, you know, I'm day 8 here, so I'm like, you know, I'm not particularly young myself. All right, I think I'm good. Yeah, and then the only other question was, and this is, you had touched on this summary by DESI function, and you're like, don't go into that. But I'm trying to reconcile the 3,175 in student services with what looks like when you add up all the 3,000s, you don't get there. But maybe you do. I mean, if I think about it in the, no, it doesn't seem like you do. Should those match up, or is that again the circuit breaker type stuff coming off the top there?
Are you talking about line 3000?
Yeah, line 3000 student services, because it jumps by 35%. So it's like, oh, okay, what's going on there? We're really serving those students well this coming year, or we're spending a ton more money on them anyway.
That's everything. That's transportation, that's enrichment, that's everything in the 3520 category. So it could be a combination of how I'm reporting it versus last year, but
No. This is all just like, this is all looking at like if I look at the 3000s columns in the like public schools and the Galvin and the Dolbear and all that, do those all add up to 3175? Is that?
And it's also the increase in stipends come from that line as well.
Okay. Okay. So it's also some of the offset stuff is there. Okay.
All set, Doug?
I'm all set.
Beautiful. I don't see any other hands raised. So Doug and Christine, do you want to, I know that you've already answered a couple of my questions. I'm just going through them. You want to take a stab at the 2, 3, or 4 that are left?
Sure. Let me see if I just can't pull those up for a minute. Exit full screen. I just got a couple of screens open at once, so it's going to take me a second.
Well, I can, while you're looking, I can tell you the first one.
I got it.
Oh, you got it? Number 1 and number 2, I think you've answered.
Okay.
I would jump to number 3.
Question number 3. These are questions that Dan sent me. Question 3 is, what do you have available for reserves? You can tap to augment what you receive from the town and outside aid, state, federal, etc. And so, circuit breaker, our entitlement grants, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so those things are still going to be options for us to use to think about how we're funding different positions and how we're using, how we might be buying technology with that money, and we might be able to kind of reallocate both our amendments and how we structure those grants to be a source to augment some of the work that we're doing. The other thing that we have in a pinch that is really not a first choice or a second choice is our special education stabilization as well.
Revolving accounts?
Our revolving accounts are, tied to programs and that fund programs. So it's a possibility, but it's something that I think we're going to need to look at longer term. And it's something that I think I need to work with Steve Mayo on, because we were just discussing this morning. In closing out this year, we're going to have a tremendous amount of loss in programs that we haven't had loss in before. And so we're anticipating that our revolving accounts are going to support and augment some of that loss. And of course, we're keeping very close track of it for anything that might be reimbursable through the state or the federal government as well.
Okay. Is there a rule against using revolving accounts for purposes not intended?
Yes.
Yes.
Go back into the program that generated the revenue.
Correct.
Got it. Thank you. Number 4.
Question 4. I'll read it as you wrote it, Dan. You said a couple of times back in February, I think it was as far back as November, but we'll say February. You said, Doug Lyons, that you wanted to develop a, quote, sustainable budget. What does that mean? And then you wrote, adding the answer for me, we can sustain 3 or 3.25%. So I don't know if that's a question that you're asking and answering as a prompt for me as the target. But I appreciate the feedback. I think, one of the things that we're looking to do is to create budgets that are reasonable. And I think, if people are, if we're expanding special education programming and it costs us $80,000 per person and we're adding 3 teachers and that's $240,000 or close to that, and we're going to save money in the long run year over year, and it's an increase in costs, I think that's responsible. I think that that's something that we need to think about as, as sustainable. And so that's one example. So I hear you, and I think this conversation about percent is something that we really need to look at. And I know we're going to need to collaborate both as a finance and facility subcommittee on the school committee side, I know we're going to have to work very closely with the liaisons, and I'm going to have to work very closely with Steve Mayo to really be clear about what's coming. Because I do think, and as I said on Monday night, we are keenly aware and paying very close attention to interest rates. We're paying attention to the economy and the markets, and how we're paying attention to unemployment. And so all of those things are directly connected to conversations that we're going to have moving forward. But in terms of sustainability, those are things that I think are important factors to be able to discuss in regard to sustainability.
Yeah, thank you. I think we can skip number 5 because I think that was answered.
Yep.
And then if you just want to send me a note, or Christina wants to send me a note like Mike did in terms of the breakdown between personal services and all other costs, and I think transportation's thrown in there.
Yeah, I think
Provided that to Kevin Gill, so I think Kevin has that for the recommended budget book.
Okay.
But I think we could send it over if
Right.
that's helpful.
Yeah, whatever. No rush. I have to put it together, and I use it for the town meeting presentation as well as the budget book.
Yep.
I think that's it for my questions. Doug, your hand is still up. Do you have more, or are you good?
Oh, I did have one more, and I'm sorry to drive in, and then we can call it a night. Do the teachers have sort of a timetable for when they have to get back to you, or when they have to vote on it, ratify the contract?
We're anticipating, Doug, that they're going to be back in touch with us within the next week, and we plan on addressing this at the next school committee meeting.
I guess, yeah. Is there a deadline on them? Because again,
We haven't given them a deadline. They're said they're going to ratify it as quickly as they possibly can. So, and I think that to be quite honest, I think they're eager to do that.
I would imagine. I mean, they could be on strike until May 3rd. Withdrawn.
Thank you, Doug. All right. I don't see any more hands up. So with that, thank you very much, Doug, Christine, Chris. I noticed you were very quiet. Thank you. And with that, I think we can move on unless somebody has something. Not seeing any hands. So why don't we go on to...
Dan, can I make a suggestion? This is Steve. Why don't we go on to the DPW section?
That's what I was doing.
Okay, perfect. Because Kevin and I have to hang around anyway, so.
I know. Yeah,
Yep.
DPW is up next.
So I think we're going to log off if that's okay with everybody.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, please. Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug.
Thanks, Doug. Joe, you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Kevin, are you going to go first, or how do you guys want to do this?
No, I'll let Joe. Joe's going to jump in.
That's fine. Mr. Chairman, I guess the question to you is, I could go one by one and then leave room for comment afterwards, or I can go through the whole thing and we can address it however you want to approach that.
Let's do it one by one.
Okay, perfect. That's where I was hoping we were going. So the first article you'll see up here is for eminent domain for $1. This is our yearly, basically insurance policy article. It lets us take conveyances and easements for the purpose of construction. It's something that we've very, very infrequently have used. We put it in there as more of a just in case for the inevitable that may happen during the year.
Okay, good. I'm assuming no has a question about spending $1 because we don't often spend it. So let's move on.
Perfect. So the next one on the list is refuse, recycling, and yard waste. This is the annual article to fund the budget for these three programs. This year for fiscal 21, the cost is up 14% from the year before, coming in at $2,274,241. One of the biggest drivers in this, the recycling contract and the refuge contract, both have contractual increases. The largest piece is the third part to the puzzle, which is the actual price to dispose of refuse. The town of Wakefield is paying currently right now $69.49. Effective July 1st, that's going to be $90. Rick had made it no secret in the past couple of years that both foreign and domestic markets were really starting to make this a challenging, theater of public works, and something that, costs have steadily increased. And that's no different today. Also, too, the DEP is influencing this too. Each one of the sites in Massachusetts, they're allowed to take tonnage from the municipal refuse. They're permitted and they have an allowance, and DEP has gotten really tight on that and not allowing more. So basically what you have is 6 to 7 facilities, within the 495 area that are so strict and so stringent that when we went out to contract this year, we had a lot of them turn us down and tell us no, that they couldn't be competitive in the market because they were right at the ceiling for capacity. That's this in a nutshell. The rest of it, it's funding the yard waste program, household hazardous waste. You'll see some processing for things like gravel and the removal of leaves and brush. That's all level funded from the year before. And then outside of that, there's your overtime costs related to actually staffing the pit and having people there.
All right. Questions?
I have a question. This is Brian. So we get a break, I assume, on what gets recycled as compared to what just gets taken to a landfill. Is that correct?
Historically speaking, there used to be a dividend program. So for every ton of paper, for every ton of metal, for every ton of plastic, it was actually taken to commodities markets, and we were paid for the raw material. What we're finding domestically is that market has basically shrunk. Internationally, that market has gotten so tight that a load is considered contaminated if they find 0.5% of byproduct that's not all paper or not all plastic. So right now, essentially, the return or the dividend from that is zero. And that's just
so you're saying.
Well, go ahead.
Sorry. So you're saying at this point that there is no real benefit from an economic perspective for recycling.
Negative. And that all basically had shifted. If you remember when Hiltz Recycling went out of business and abruptly stopped their contract in Wakefield, that was basically because their contracts were set up. Wakefield was getting a minimum of $40 a ton for paper. And that couldn't sustain because they weren't getting anything for it on the market. So it basically drove them into the poorhouse. So right now, no. There's just a cost associated with collecting it and sending it off to be processed.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to follow up. You say there's a cost to getting rid of it. Is that the same cost, per ton as a regular trash?
So right now, the town of Wakefield is fortunate where the current recycling contract is priced out for the price to actually collect it at the curb bi-weekly and process the material and take it to market. So that's all encompassed in that budgetary number. What I'm being told the future is going to look like is you're going to see refuse similar to trash. There's going to be the price to collect it at the curb, and then there's going to be the price per ton to process it. Early estimates are that the future, they're looking at a fee of about $150 a ton, which would actually make recycling more expensive than sending curbside refuse to the incinerator at the waste to energy plant in Haverhill.
Thank you.
Right. So at that point, we'll probably just stop recycling.
So Massachusetts is a funny one because recycling is mandatory, but I'll rip the Band-Aid off. There's going to be a couple of hard conversations that'll have to happen between, Public Works and the council and then the town as a whole about, what the markets look like and then what those programs might look like, and is it economically feasible, right? Because we have that fiduciary responsibility, plus, we want to do the right thing and we want to keep our town clean, but we have to seek some sort of a balance. And I think it's going to take, the next year and a half worth of conversation and really planning and paying attention to that market to find where that balance is and where we're going to seek our level.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Anybody else? I don't see any hands up. So I think we can move on to roadway improvements.
Can I actually make a suggestion? So on the roadway improvements, we're actually going to show you a little bit of a presentation. Do you mind if
do you want me to bring it up, or Steve to bring it up? Who's going to do
Dan,
it?
you've been doing so good, Dan. Why don't you bring it up?
All right. So which presentation do you want to start? Which file do you want to start with?
The PowerPoint should say road.
PowerPoint. Okay. Two.
He really is doing a terrific job.
He is.
All right,
It would take me longer.
Oh, look at that.
Okay, so I'll briefly tee this one off, and then I'm gonna turn this over to Bill Renault, who really did the lion's share of the work about putting this presentation and really this whole capital plan and approach together. The point and juncture that we're at in time right now is something that Public Works and the town have been talking about for a few years. Obviously, we know that roadways is something that there's an appetite for the town to invest more money into. And, over the last at least 2 years that I've been conscious to it, the question always was, well, what is your approach? You're telling us that you want to, take this approach and seek out efficiencies. How do those efficiencies look on paper? Where's your mindset? And kind of, shed a little bit of light into the planning and the thought process behind everything. So what you'll see in this presentation that Bill's about to deliver to you is this is a comprehensive look at taking the roadway approach and funding it to an appropriate level to essentially get our roadway network up to the grade level of a B. Without getting too much further into it and stealing some of the shine off the presentation, I'll let Bill kind of go through his thing, and hopefully we'll have some questions after.
Sure. Well, thanks, Joe. I'm assuming everyone can hear me on the phone this time, right?
Yep.
Okay, great. So basically our game plan here is to systematically go through our 88-mile network to essentially bring the network up to an acceptable standard. In the industry, we do pavement condition inventories where we look at, the entire network and essentially rate every single road segment within the town. We've gone through that over the last year with some new technology that actually allows us to get granular to almost every 10 feet or so. We take a snapshot of the roadways and, see where we are for condition and then average those out for each segment. So the goal to get to that acceptable standard is what they call we call it a road surface rating. That's what that inventory provides us. And what that is a 1 to 100, essentially a 1 to 100 score. 100 being a brand new paved road. On the lower end of the scale is a road that, obviously that has a lot of issues with it that needs to be completely redone and with 2 new layers of asphalt and whatnot. So besides getting it up to a standard, our target goal is what we would do an 80 RSR, or road surface rating. That's the B that Joe was talking about. We're also looking to try to fund this with consistent investments annually so that we can plan these projects more effectively. And that's what we've kind of come up with here in this. We also look to coordinate these projects with planned utility works. By the light plan, as well as water and sewer and public works and private work like the Eversource and National Grid project that's going on in town. And then we also look to improve, situations when they're appropriate. So our drainage, if there's, insufficient drainage there, we would look to make those modifications at the same time we're going to pave the road. If we needed to make sidewalk repairs, we would do the same at the same time when we're paving the road. Safety and accessibility enhancements as well. We can bop to the next slide. So what this is, when I talked about the the road surface rating. What ends up happening is as a road deteriorates, it goes into one of these bands. So we have the length of miles of each band. Deferred maintenance is essentially a road that's been newly paved. Routine maintenance would be a road that's in pretty good shape and we just look to crack seal. Preventive maintenance would be something where we're looking to do a thin overlay or some type of slurry seal or targeted patching in large sections of a road. And then we get into the minor rehabilitation, which is our mill and overlay. You see those typically on highways where they just grind out that top layer of asphalt and put it back. And then you have the major rehabilitation, which is really what we don't want to have happen. Major rehabilitation, basically from a cost standpoint, costs us about 2 to 2.5 times a minor rehabilitation or mill and overlay. That's really, the decision has to be made somewhere between that mill and overlay and reclaim as to, when we can get in there to make that repair, or if we're going to let it deteriorate to get worse and then come back and hit it, in say like 5 or 6 years. And so that's what the plan really has begun to look at. So looking at this chart, you see about 59% of our network right now is either going to need a minor rehabilitation or a major rehabilitation. Right now, our backlog is estimated at about $19 million. If we jump to the next slide, this looks at our projected backlog in 5 years if we were to do no work. So basically, we don't fund anything at all. You'll notice that we increase substantially. We're into about 65% of our network now is in either a minor rehabilitation or major rehabilitation. But the big takeaway from this slide is that a lot of our network has slid from minor rehabilitation into major rehabilitation. That obviously adds a lot of dollars to it. So we would increase about $10 million in that 5-year range if we were to do nothing over that 5 years. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so if we go to the next slide. So what we did with our with the software is we looked at projections on trying to determine what, based on a few different scenarios, what we would need to fund to get us up to that target line of the 80 RSR. So that's the dashed line that's on the top of the graph. We looked at scenario 1, which is essentially not funding anything at all and just putting in Chapter 90 funds. And you can see how that's in the maroon, how the condition of the roads continue to drop off. Scenario 2 is basically what we did for fiscal 20, so $750,000 in addition to our Chapter 90 funding, and that still has us degrading. So that's what we were talking about at last town meeting, where I think one of the residents had asked, you're telling me right now that you're getting $750 and you're still expecting that you need more money. Well, this is kind of the graph to show that and why we need more. So scenario 3 looks at $1.5 million of additional funds. Scenario 4, $2 million, and then scenario 5, which is what we're recommending, $2.5. So that essentially puts us in 9 years from now at funding at $2.5 million per year. We would be at the target RSR of 80. So if we jump to the next slide. Looked at how do we fund all of our, because obviously we don't just have that, that roadway article, but here's how we funded it for fiscal 20. We have the $750,000 roadway article, our Chapter 90 state aid at about $675. We received a grant for Complete Streets, which funded $400,000 for sidewalks on Albion Street, which was, not necessarily something we planned for, but it was an opportunity, and we were lucky to get that. We have the road revolving fund, which is essentially street cuts and road cuts. As they puncture the road, they pay a fee based on the square feet that they impact, and then we turn that money back around into the roads to do patching and some of the smaller the smaller needs, and more of the maintenance work that needs to get done. And then we have our operating maintenance budget, which is just over $200,000. Yeah, I'm good for the next one. Thanks. So funding sources for fiscal 21. So this is with our proposed plan of the $2.5 million roadway bond. Again, our Chapter 90 stays, we're assuming level funded. That could change with what's going on today. There's also a transportation bond bill that looked to potentially increase this too, but right now we're assuming that it would stay level funded. One of the questions that we received is how much work are we getting from Eversource with their proposed to mill and overlay all the streets that they touch. Unfortunately, we've estimated that to be a little under $1 million. Big takeaway on that, though, is that they're going to be repaving streets that we wouldn't necessarily be going into. They're essentially maintaining the condition of a couple of the streets that they're on, and there are a couple that would be on our paving plan, but it wouldn't be, say, a dollar to dollar towards the program. Is kind of the takeaway from that. And then we have a couple of grants that we're looking at. An MVP action grant, which we're in the process of applying for now, which would be $1 million for Main Street from Carriage Lane to Salem. And then obviously the Envision Wakefield TIP project, which we're working with the state to try and fund in their transportation improvement program. Our estimate today is at $25 million for that project. Road revolving fund, I assumed it level funded at $75,000. Again, that's based on road cuts. So if there's more work going on in the streets, that number can go up. If there's less, it can go down. And then the operating budget, which is assumed to be level funded for fiscal 21. So about a little over $200,000 in the operating budget. And so this shows essentially what a $2.5 million annual investment would look like for the next 3 years. About 4.25 miles of road being rehabilitated in fiscal 21, 5.5 in fiscal 22, getting back to 4.25 for fiscal 23. The jump in those miles is based upon the types of treatments that we're using in those areas and coordinating with work being planned by the light plant and our water and sewer division.
Bill, can I jump in for 1 second?
Please.
It's important to note on this slide that heavy area of work that's being done to the east side of Lake Quannapowitt, and I believe we are behind the gas and light department here. So they have already done the gas work. And one of the questions we always got was, you paved the road, how come they're tearing back into it? So this is a scenario where that should not happen whatsoever.
Right. That's a good point. If we can jump to the next slide, please. So this shows basically our town-wide status map. So where in those treatment bands that each roadway network that's public would fall. You'll see a few roads that are grayed out. Those are all private streets that we would do through betterments and, kind of outside of this program. But this gives you an idea of where your street would land in a kind of in a graphic sense. And if we jump to the next one, I think this is where I turn it over to Mr. Mayo.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, is it okay if I continue here?
Go ahead.
Okay. So anyways, what we're proposing is, at this point, is going forward with a $10 million road bond. What we would do is we're proposing borrowing $2.5 million of that a year for the next 4 years. And the reason why we're borrowing $2.5 million of that is because that's probably all we can do work in 1 year. And you can't borrow all that money up front and just sit on it. And maybe that looked really good in the bond market a month ago. Borrowing all that money now might be not that good anyway. I'm sure Doug Butler will talk to that when he has a chance. And what I'm planning is that $750,000 that we put into the annual roads article and the $125,000 from the annual sidewalk article, we add that to the debt service account for fiscal year 21. So we take our existing debt service, we add those two articles to that. So we ostensibly keep our cost to the taxpayer the same, or the tax levy the same. This is all within Prop 2.5. And then we borrow the money over the next 4 years, $2.5 million to fund the actual work. What my goal was here was to create a substantially equal effect to the tax levy every year. Now, bear in mind, when I look at the bond, bonding, I want to make sure, that we can handle all of the items that are being talked about or being on the docket, including the public safety building, which the Finance Committee has to talk about or opine again, so we're going to need another meeting on that one. The roads article we talked about. Some of the other items, the fire trucks we've already approved. There's a drainage article that Joe will talk about pretty soon. And some of the other items, betterments, although they're paid by the taxpayer, the abutters there directly. I want to make sure all of the actual All of those will fit into the bond schedule, and really keeping our payments the same. And I'm working with bond counsel, and they based all this on a bond rate of 4%, which I thought was very high at the time. So that's going to be another thing we're going to have to think about here as we go forward. By staggering these payments out over the next few years and and figuring when the new public safety building would come in, we could actually, in fiscal year 22, lower our bond payment from what would be $3,076,000 out of the tax levy, which is exactly the same as we did last year, including those 2 articles, to 2.6 million because of the way that some items fall off, and continue to increase our bond fund balance over time as we've been doing for a while. This will also accommodate the Greenwood School roof that we'll talk about later tonight too. So we've talked about bonding for a long time, road bonding for a long time with Finance Committee. I think you can go to the next slide, Dan, if you want, because I think I talked about it anyway. We've talked about this for a long time, and we just really didn't have the room to do it. And I know that was a sense of frustration for me and frustration for some members of the Finance Committee. We had a lot of other things that we did. We did some schools and what have you. So this does work, given how we're looking at today's numbers and the projects that we have on the docket. And I think that we will build up the debt service, and but most importantly, we'll substantially improve the condition of the town's roadways and sidewalk networks and reduce the current project backlog. And one thing I want to say about the program that Joe and Bill have put together is that it's actually gone through every street in Wakefield. And correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, I think every 10 feet, it takes really a picture of the road, and then it grades that road on its condition, the traffic that it has on it. And we actually have, I believe it was in the town council packet, and we can put that on the website. I believe it's on there right now. They rate every road in town, every public way in town, alphabetically on what their RSR factor is. So you can look at your road and say, hey, I'm at a 62. Maybe I'm going to get some work pretty soon. Or, hey, I'm at an 87, and they're just going to fill in the cracks. The other item that other issue that we're really interested in making sure we do over the next few years is we're really interested in make sure that we systematically beef up the DPW budget. So in their budget, we're putting more for road maintenance and construction. We kind of had the same approach we had with snow and ice, same approach we have with capital. I think some of the old grizzled veterans on the Finance Committee with me remember that snow and ice used to be $293.5 a year for many years. We've moved that up to $850 in a methodical way. I think capital was around $250,000 years ago. Now that's hovering around $2 million every year plus the bonding. So I think this is a really good program and a way we can make this work. And really because of all the work that was done years ago, and with all those projects falling off, 2 schools, the first public safety building, the fields at the high school fall off in a few years, the senior center, work at the town hall, it really is making a difference, and we can tackle these other projects. A lot to throw at you at 9:30 at night, but I'm ready for questions.
So thank you, Steve. I threw up on the screen the document that goes road by road, and I did share this with all the Finance Committee members.
Great.
So that's available. All right. So questions. I see Evan's hand is up. So Evan, you're on.
Forgive me if you guys mentioned this, but I imagine, and this is just more in support of the idea of bonding for roads, especially right now. Are you expecting, because of the declining price in petroleum, that you're going to get more done than you originally expected to get done with this amount of money? I mean, that could be a real benefit for us right now, right?
That is a bit of a silver lining, but go ahead, Bill. Take it.
Yeah, no, it can be. So what we do is we bid our projects as by state statute, we're actually required to include an asphalt escalator, but that can also de-escalate. So, consider that market can be volatile at times. So, we could bid this thing when it's at a low point, right? And then, during the year, the prices skyrocket back up. If that happens, we're still going to be required to pay the numbers that you're seeing. So we budget for the numbers basically as an average over the last few years. I wouldn't necessarily budget on what they would get for cost at the beginning of the season.
So you're
because
paying.
Unfortunately. No, I'm sorry. Just one other piece is that back I think it was 2007 or 8 when it was the first real spike with oil, and a lot of towns were stuck in situations where they had contracts that were out and they couldn't actually pave any more streets because they couldn't afford it, and some of them were actually paving not realizing that they included the escalator, and were due tens of thousands of dollars to their contractors.
So the contractor
we try to avoid that situation.
The contractor can charge above the bid amount if based on the oil prices at the time they begin construction.
They can. So it's through MassDOT. So MassDOT has a period pricing that they do monthly, and that comes out. So anything that's paved within that monthly period has an ability to be adjusted based upon the fluctuation of the market.
Seems to sort of eliminate a big part of the bid process, but I get it. Thank you.
Yes and no, but yeah.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. Stefan, you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Yep, you're up.
So the article that's going to be proposed is for 4 years at 2.5 million.
It'd be for $10 million, yes.
$10 million. Okay. So the
plan would be to go to four times 2.5 million would be the plan.
Okay. So on the on slide 5, where they list out the funding scenarios. So scenario 5 is essentially what the town article is hoping to achieve.
Yep, exactly.
Right.
Correct.
Yep.
So over this time period, in order to get us to that target line, though, we would need $2.5 million for the next 10 years, correct? Is that
9
what
years,
I'm
but yeah.
looking at here?
Yep.
Yes.
9 years?
Correct.
Right.
So are we going to be going back to the town again in 4 years for another 5 years worth of?
Well, yeah, I mean,
$2.5 million bonds?
right, yeah, my thought is that let's see how this works. Let's go out with $10 million because what other things could happen? Chapter 90 could increase. The MMA has pushed Mass Municipal Association has pushed Mass DOT, has pushed the state to increase Chapter 90 funding, which would increase us by another third on that item. And I thought that might be a good point to reassess where we were and then come back and do it before. And I think also some of the town council members felt that they didn't want to, handcuff the town and go completely forward with this whole 20 million. The other point is that if we can increase the DPW budget for roads systemically over that next 5 years, increase that a little bit, maybe that coupled with more Chapter 90 money might mean that we're gonna, we're lowering that gap without having to go out for another 10 million in bonding. Maybe it would be 6. So that was kind of our thought process there, to take a couple of steps.
So I guess another question that I have is, with roads essentially being, I guess, pre-existing condition, I'll call it. But why don't we have the DPW budget at a level that will support keeping us at the target line of 80 RSR? Like in perpetuity.
Yeah, I think in the long run, that's our goal to get there, but we certainly couldn't be adding 2.5 million to the budget right now in that way. We would have to, the only way to do it is to bond it over. I get it. I wish we could get there. 10 years ago, we didn't have anything in any of these budgets. We had to move them all up, and this is the next one. This is a way to do it.
And I guess on a return on your investments, I guess with that interest rate that you quoted previously, does it make sense for us to repair these roads at an interest rate as opposed to tackling them with the money that we currently have on hand year over year?
Well, we don't have that money on hand right now. You know, we do want to maintain reserves because that keeps our interest rates down, which aren't going to be huge anyway if we look at some budget deficits in other areas. But you know what? I guess in bonding and in interest rates, it's a big issue. That 4%, which looked awfully high, a high estimate a few months ago, or a month and a half ago, doesn't look so high today. And I think that'll come back in the capital markets. But I think this is the way that we need to do this.
I mean, just in general, the town is about to, you know, with the new high school, new vote, we're going to be taking on tons of debt.
Right. Right. And I remember the new high school, the only way to do the new high school, in my opinion, is outside of 2.5. So this would all be inside 2.5. And I think the VOC, we can squeeze inside 2.5 too, because the VOC is done on a per capita method. So it's based on the number of students we have there, and all the Chapter 70 won't follow it like it does on the regular VOC budget. So that might not be that bad for us.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, Stefan. Doug, your hand is up. Doug, turn your mic on.
Sorry, guys. So two
Remember,
things.
Doug, I can mute you at any time.
Yeah, awesome. Well, you'll be happy, Steve. The last 2 days has been the biggest muni rally in
good.
So like rates have come down dramatically for munis.
Great.
In fact, yesterday we actually put munis in some people's IRAs and whatnot, sold a bunch of treasuries and moved to munis.
Great.
But that's sort of a sidebar. One is two things. One, the degree to which, like, do we feel you're very confident that spending the $2.5 million in road construction won't result in dramatic impact to the townsfolk in terms of building out the road? Like, it just feels like people complained about road construction last year quite a bit. And that was a lot less than $2.5 million in roads.
Right. Well, my philosophy on road construction is, Doug, is that people complain about the roads before you build them. They complain about them during the building process. They complain about it after the building process because people drive too fast. So we will try to spread this around so it's not, you know, all in, you know, it's not, you can still go places in town. I get it. The DPW has been really good and very creative about doing roads. And I think when they did Lowell Street last year, boy, what a great job they did there. I think they paved it at night, and a couple of nights it was done. So maybe Joe Conway and Bill can jump in on that question.
Yeah, Bill, I'll take this. So Doug, you have flexibility with, you know, some of the nighttime work. So I'll give you an example, like Vernon Street between 128 and Lowell Street will definitely be an overnight project. So there won't be gridlock, you know, in the morning and things like that. You also notice too on the map that I interjected in Bill's presentation and kind of talked about the corner of the town that we're planning on doing our work in this upcoming year. We're away from the gas department. We're away from National Grid. We're trying to minimize the impact as much as we can. Unfortunately, from time to time, there is a necessary inconvenience, but if we could be flexible and work at night, the cost doesn't go up. It's just a scheduling. So we'll do whatever we can to minimize that. All the residences and abutters will be notified beforehand and have their, you know, chance to weigh in. So it's not like they're going to be hit with a curveball when we're in town. We're in their neck of the woods, I should say. I think it's pretty manageable. You know, there's a little bit of a give and a take, but for the most part, we're going to try to be as least disruptive as we can possibly be.
And then to Steve, and maybe to Steve, and I guess it's probably to the town council. Why are we like, to sort of with Stefan's question, why It's sort of the reverse of Stefan's question. Why are we sweating the 2.5? Like, why not have this be as, why are we putting the 750 and why are we putting it into the debt service fund instead of raising this money and just using it and having it be an override?
Or having it be an override?
Yeah.
I don't, I think that for the taxpayer, I think that we should keep this within 2.5. If people want to make it an override, that's up to them. But I think with the high school coming on, which has to be an override, the Galvin coming on, that's a lot to ask for the taxpayer, in my opinion.
Okay.
All right, Doug, you all set?
I'm all set.
All right, Ed. Oh, good to hear from you.
Good evening, everyone. How are you? I just
public participation.
Well, I just wanted to feed off of Steve's point, so I guess I'll be tangential to that because you raised the town council. I think one thing that was important from the town council perspective was the fact that there's a real cost to us for inaction. So if we fail to do this, as Bill had mentioned previously, we're looking at exponentially higher costs to get to the same point. So we're actually getting, from an investment standpoint, we're getting far less of a return on that, because instead of the $6 or the, I think it was $20, we're at the $40 mark. I think it's per square yard, if I'm not mistaken. Bill and Joe, please correct me. So it was really important in looking at this from a strategic perspective to try to get ahead of this as best we could, because otherwise we're just spending more money, but we're not getting more improved roads as a result. So that was really important for us in looking at it. And from the looking out the next few years, we do have the Envision project, as Bill had mentioned. We don't know what that's going to mean in terms of what kind of road coverage we'll have there. We also have opportunities with developers going forward in terms of things like sidewalks and perhaps some road work there as well, built into these new projects. So there were a lot of variables that we kind of tried to take into account to answer your question, Doug, and getting to where we did with this. And I just want to thank Steve for working so hard with Kevin Gill and Bond Council on working through this, as to not have this onerous on the taxpayers, but still respond to a need that has long existed and something that we hear about it almost every day.
And just to Joe and to Bill on the phone, the other question was, you set that target of 80, and I'm doing hand gestures and I shouldn't do that. Have we ever been close to 80 as a town? Like, so if we've never, it's like me saying like, yeah, my target goal weight is 163 pounds, but that ship has long since sailed.
Mine is too. If it makes you feel any better, that is my target goal weight. No, I mean, I can tell you that it is achievable. I mean, the town that I worked in previously, that was the target that we used, and we hit it. You know, it was over the course of better half of a decade to get up to that point. They just started it, I think, a little bit earlier than Wakefield has. That's the only difference I'm seeing. So, you know,
oops, sorry.
Go ahead, Joe.
I was going to say, I think too, historically, you know, there was a period of time in the early and mid 90s where Chapter 90 actually fully funded your road program. At that point, were you at a road surface rating of your 80? I would say that it's likely, but since probably the mid 90s till current times, you know, the Chapter 90 allotment didn't really keep pace with inflation and costs. So you've kind of been behind the 8 ball since, you know, probably the mid 90s at best.
Right.
Okay. All right. I don't see more hands up. So why don't we go to the revolving account?
Sure. So the revolving amounts, as Bill had mentioned in the presentation, and if you remember, I believe from town meeting, we got creative and we decided to set up a roadway account and a funding account to try to gain some efficiencies in some of our road repair. So basically what we did was we created the road revolving account. Any contractor that performs a utility cut into the street pays a square footage price to us, and then we apply that money right back into roadway improvements. For this year, we'd like to set the spending authorization at $75,000. That lines up with some of the projections with some of the projects that we have in the queue. And that would allow us to take any retained fees and put them right back into the roadway shown as an improvement.
Very good. Doug, your hand's up. Do you have a new question or is it still from the last one?
Nope, you're on mute.
Still up, sorry. Lowering my hand.
All right. Any questions? Stefan, go ahead.
So I noticed earlier during the discussion of the capital plan, there was a roads section in that. It was a patching program for 75K, I believe, was the recommended amount. Is that included within this this slideshow? Is that in addition?
So, because that has not been funded yet through town meeting.
But that's in addition.
In addition, yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Seeing none. Let's move on to Salem Street.
Okay, so the new Salem Street drainage repairs. A few years back now, the DPW had consulted with an engineer to come in and do a townwide drainage study. One of the things that they noted as a highlighted project was the replacement of a culvert on New Salem Street between Vernon Street and Preston Street. One of the things, it was actually a great catch by Bill and his staff. They found out that due to some structural limitations in the soil in the area, it's basically on peat and fill, that the intended project as scoped actually couldn't be constructed for the budget that we had to do it. What we found in the short term now is that the culvert, which is perpendicular to a lot of businesses' entryways into their driveways and their garage space, is actively failing at a rate that made this project a must-have right now. So Bill, I don't know if you want to talk about the technical piece to this and the reasons why the cost inflation happened with this particular project.
Yeah, sure. So, the last article was somewhere in and about $750,000 to fund the design of the culvert and permitting, as well as the full design. The design, in order to get the permit approved, we had to go with a much wider structure based on the state regulations from the DEP, and in doing that, it actually adds a lot more weight to the soil. Like Joe mentioned, the soil below is all peat, so we had to install piles and then a grade beam essentially to hold up the entire culvert. That number was very much about the same cost as what we had for the initial budget for the project, and not something really that I think the initial consultant that did the townwide drainage study would have been able to figure out. To be honest with you, we figured that out by doing some soil investigations, and that's really why we need this additional funding.
Thank you. Any questions on New Salem Street? I'm seeing none. So let's move on to Walton.
Okay, so last on our submission for town meeting, but certainly not least, is the Walton Lane betterment. If you remember, this was actually an article proposed for the fall, but Mr. Mullen had advised Public Works that it actually couldn't be voted on by town meeting at the fall town meeting. It needed to go to the annual town meeting in the spring. What this is a citizen petition roadway betterment. All of the abutters are in favor of the project and have decided to split the cost amicably between them. So this is just bringing that article back to the table so it could be voted on and these people can fund their road work.
Thank you. And if memory serves, I think the Finance Committee did vote to approve this Walton Lane last fall, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Right. Any questions on it? Greenwood.
Great job, Joe and Bill. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry about the lateness of the hour, but yeah, thank you very much.
No worries.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Bye.
So who's handling the Greenwood School, Joe?
Yeah, I am. I think you have a budget estimate that was provided, a budget update. The Permanent Building Committee met with the architect last week, as well as the our owner's project manager. And even though due to the non-essential businesses being held up, we are actually on schedule, and we intend to go out to bid in the first week of April for the roof job, and hope to have the bids in by the end of April and have them ready for town meeting. So with town meeting, these are estimates that the budgets have been provided. These are not the actual numbers. The actual number will be the actual bid, and we are very hopeful, due to the economic times, that bids are going to be lower than these estimates. However, the estimates based originally from the architect's cost estimator had it at $1,675,000 at the schematic design, and at 60%, which was estimate of 60% of the design was submitted to the MSBA. At 60% of it, the estimate was lower by $35,000 to $1,640,000. This not only includes the roof, but it also includes some ADA improvements to the school, including a handicap accessible bathroom, ramps that are required under the Code of Mass Regulations. The Permanent Building Committee has voted to have the architect what's called a notice to proceed to complete the 100%, and they will be doing so within the next week. So the actual number that will eventually go to town meeting is not necessarily this number, but whatever the bid is. The state is going to be providing us with a maximum grant of between $677,000 and $705,000 based upon contingencies. If there's any questions.
Looking for hands.
If I can jump in, Dan.
Go ahead.
The Greenwood roof has been on our capital plan for many, many years, and a big nut to do all on our own. So this was a great collaboration between the Permanent Building Committee and the school department, filing the SOI under the extraordinary repairs section of the school building authority. So not only do we get the roof, but we get some ADA enhancements that we should have had anyway at the Greenwood School. So this is really what I would think is a real win-win for the town. To get close to 50% of all of this covered is fabulous.
Okay. Any questions for Joe or Steve? Dennis, you're up.
Yeah, as far as what he says is add once he gets his bids in, we're still going to have contingency money in there and everything in there for the article for town meeting, right? So that we're not going to get shot, right?
Oh, of course, you're going to have those contingencies in there, but we'll know what the actual bid is rather than the estimates that we're getting now.
Okay, all right, no problem.
Actually, I brought up on screen, you can see the contingencies there for 131,000, 59,000, 55,000, lots of contingencies. You see that, Dennis?
No, I see it, but I just didn't know what Joe is saying, that it could go, once you get the main numbers. He's just talking about the projected budget would be going with the bid numbers, and all the rest of the contingencies would carry on from that. So, okay, now I understand it.
Very good. Anybody else? Nothing. Okay, now we have cable TV, another article. Kevin or Steve?
We talked about that earlier when we did the cable TV access budget requirement by the Mass Department of Revenue that we accept Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53F and a half, to set up an enterprise fund for the funds that come in for public cable access.
All right, so I guess in the order of at town meeting, we'll be setting a budget for something that doesn't exist, and then we're going to create it.
We'll probably, I would recommend that we do the article to set up the enterprise fund before we do the budget.
Only problem is that budget will be part of Article 1.
Right, that's my point.
Yeah.
You can't make this Article 1 and then the budget? Article 2?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess we could do that.
Just recommending.
Yep.
Thank you. All right, so that's pretty mundane. Let's see, now going back to the other budgets, which we did not cover. Mr. Gill, you want to take care of the Northeast Voc School budget?
Sure. The Northeast Regional and other vocational school budget, recommending an increase in this budget, a total increase of $132,538. For the Northeast line item, the increase was $150,109. We have 7 additional students anticipated for next year. We currently have 75 students there. Next year, we anticipate 82. The Minuteman Regional School, we are looking at a decrease of $48,711. We currently have 3 students there in fiscal 20. 2 will be graduating, so I am budgeting 1 student there next year. The Essex North line item, we're looking at a increase of $52,430. In fiscal 20, we budgeted 3 students. We actually had 6 that ended up going there this year. So this year, we're going to be looking for a reserve fund transfer. None of the students will be graduating next year, so we budgeted 6 students there for next year. Transportation cost, we're looking at a decrease, $21,290. The big decrease there is the 2 less students at the Minuteman Regional. The total budget request for fiscal 21 is $1,574,273.
Great, thank you. Questions on the vocational schools? Anybody? All right, I'm still seeing none. So I believe we go to the group health insurance next.
The group insurance budget requesting an increase of $374,034 over fiscal 2020. This breaks down the increase to the tax levy portion is $193,292. We increased personal services $5,726. These are contractual and negotiated increases. We increased transfers from the enterprise funds, $180,742. This budget also includes $1,675,000 as a contribution to the town's OPEB liability. At the end of fiscal 19, the OPEB reserve account had a balance of approximately $16.3 million. The total budget request for fiscal 2021 is $13,745,967, with $11,835,960 coming from tax levy, $383,701 from the water enterprise, $269,540 from the sewer enterprise, and $1,256,766 coming from the municipal gas company.
I'm going to jump in as Don and I met with Kevin, Steve, and Amy. And I sent a note or a memo to the Finance Committee regarding this budget. The GIC rates have increased anywhere from 0.8 to 7.3% over that of 2020. And I'm estimating that our total costs will go up about 475. And at the bottom of the screen here, what I did was figure out that for 2019, 870,000 was returned to the general fund. So our actual spend, if you will, was 12,003. In 2020, Kevin gave me an estimate of about between $650,000 returning the general fund. So our actual spend is at 12,000,007. And if this 475 is a good number, which is a good guess, then I'm estimating $400,000 would be returned to the general fund. So even though our net increase, especially at the town level, is only 1.7%, I think our actual spend will be more than that. But again, $400,000 will be returning to the general fund, and I'm happy to see that this line is slowly going down. So we're starting to budget closer to what we actually spend. And with that, I'll see if Don has anything to add from the subcommittee perspective. Don?
No, Dan, I think you covered it. I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on healthcare? Stefan, go ahead.
I had a quick question regarding how we negotiate for these rates. Do we actually have a good negotiating stance with these companies, given the competitive marketplace? Or are we able to somehow gain some type of, I don't know, economies of scale by partnering up with other nearby communities or, like risk pool communities for additional savings?
I say, Steve, that's a good softball question. You want to take that one or shall I?
We get the best rates we can. Actually, we're members of the Group Insurance Commission, which is the state program. So I offhand, I can't think of the number of cities and towns that are involved in that. So every city and town that is in that gets the same rates. And these rates have been much more stable and much lower than any other program we were in before. I'm hearing from my compadres that are either that have gone out to bid, and we've gone out to bid too. We go out every year, every 3 years, to see if we can get a better deal. Some of them are just in Blue Cross or just in Harvard Health, and they're looking at 7, 8, 9, 10% increases across the board. GIC has a number of programs you can go into. You can go into used to be neighborhood health plan. It's Always. There is a Harvard is one of the ones. Really all the major carriers are in there, except for Blue Cross that refuses to enter into this. And the state goes and gets the best rates because of their buying power, and we piggyback off of that. So I think we get pretty good rates there.
I can add to that I just had a discussion with an auditor who was questioning my healthcare trend rates that I'm assuming for a client is a GIC client. And I pointed out to them that over the last 7 years, the average cost increase for the GIC plans is about 3%. And that's much less than MMA or many other programs that are out there. So we've saved a ton of money as well when, 8 years ago, we got off the GIC, onto the GIC from MMA. We cut $3 million from this budget.
Right. And we fully fund OPEB within.
That's correct. So yeah, we got a good deal going right now. Any other questions on healthcare? Seeing none. I think that takes care of the budgets. And next up is committee comments. I'm not sure there's any committee comments at this point because we're at the end. But I'll entertain any comments if somebody wants to add anything. Seeing none.
Can I add something before you adjourn?
Of course.
Am I asking too much? Our next scheduled meeting would have been the 9th, or is the 9th. would it be asking this committee too much? And usually that's just the voting meeting. I think that we still need to talk about the public safety building, because that will be coming back to the to town meeting in May or whenever we have it. We also, Kevin, we have an article for what is it, Medicaid?
Yeah, Medicaid reimbursement.
Medicaid reimbursement. That's a quick discussion. There are a couple of citizen petitions that involve potential fines for the use of non-biodegradable items that normally the FinCom listens to. And then I think we're done with everything. So I would request, if we could, to have another Zoom meeting on the 2nd, and then the final meeting on the 9th.
Can we wrap those things up on the 9th?
It's up to you, Mr. Chairman, but I know that the public safety building might take a little bit of time. But it's up to you. I can do it we can do it in one night or two.
Evan, go ahead.
I would just suggest breaking it up into 2 meetings. I think whether it's a classroom of elementary school students or a sophisticated finance committee, by the time we get to 10:30, you're not getting the best out of us. So I don't think it's a bad idea, especially since we're all at home anyway, to break it up into 2 meetings and have more thorough discussions about some very substantive topics. So that's my take.
Thank you. I just checked my calendar. I can do the 2nd, and I think we're all going to be doing the same Zoom meeting, so obviously we're going to be comfortable. This will give us something to do. Anybody have objections to getting a Zoom meeting on the 2nd? I don't see any. Okay. What are the odds of having the supervisor's contract ready for the 2nd?
Well, they're not the only ones that are out. I would say that those police and fire are very close, but I don't think you'll have them on the 2nd.
The 9th?
No. You won't have, no.
All right.
No, those will have to go to the town council first anyway.
Okay. Let's see, Evan, your hand is up. Is that old? Is that new? That's off. Dennis, you're up.
Yes, is there, I'm asking this to Steve, what is the potential of town meeting being extended so we don't have to condense, maybe expand when we have some more definitive information on contracts? Are we better off moving beyond the April 2nd special meeting you're asking for now to moving it to the other end of the scheduled April meeting in hope to have more better information on other information for other articles?
I think the chances of town meeting being moved are very good, number one. And so that is certainly up to the up to your board or your committee. My goal was to have everything ready to roll when we had to have it ready to roll. I think we would still approve a warrant, although the warrant's not going to change. So we can certainly do that, because I think we should need, we may have to have a warrant for a meeting to move, if you understand what I'm saying. Our charter does require us to have a town meeting within 30 days of the first Monday of April. I don't know, I think that with all of this going on, we do have the authority to kind of waive that requirement. My big thing is I prefer to have everything ready to go. So I hate to do it to you guys, but my preference is to move forward on these things now. Just in case.
It would be likely then that with like the supervisor's contract, we'd have to meet like 6:30 before town meeting.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's, we've done.
And maybe we'll have more time to do those too. I mean, if we move it, certainly we can go back and do those, maybe by another Zoom meeting. But you won't have them by the 9th.
All right. I'm up for any other discussion in terms of April 2nd. If somebody, one option we could do is if people have, check their calendars, check with their spouses, and get back to me like tomorrow, and then we can make a final decision on April 2nd. Is that all right for everybody? I'm not seeing any objections.
Inspired leadership, let's go with that.
All right. Okay, now I will entertain a motion for adjournment unless somebody has something else.
Make a motion that we adjourn.
Absolutely not.
We're muting you right now, Butler. You're muted.
All right, I got a motion from Jim. Do I have a second?
Second.
And that was who?
I don't know, but Pete could be a
Gerard,
hand.
second.
Now.
All right, all those in favor, hang up.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, all.
All right, thank you guys. Hey, I think it worked. I think it did work.
Good night. Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
everybody.